Hey everyone, my name is Zach and I wanted to welcome you to the CSS Flexbox course. This course is a totally interactive course where I'm going to walk you through all the basics of CSS Flexbox, and we'll also be building a project at the end to apply those new skills. My goal with this video is to make it the last video that you ever need to understand CSS Flexbox and to be very thorough for someone who is just learning this for the first time. This course is actually a combination of all the videos that I've posted on my channel related to this, but it follows a very sequential structure where we will start from the very beginning, we will assume no knowledge of CSS Flexbox and go all the way to the point where you're going to be really confident using it while developing web applications. The only prerequisite here is to have a pretty firm grasp of both HTML and CSS. Otherwise, you should be good. I wish you the best of luck. Be sure to check the description for some resources and next steps, and let's get into the video.
So let's get started. This is a Flexbox crash course, and the prerequisites for it is going to be a basic understanding of HTML and CSS. I've covered all of this in prior lessons of this series, so go check those out if you're unfamiliar. Here's what we're going to be covering in this video. We're going to learn what Flexbox is, how it can help you out and make your life easier. We're going to go through all the basic properties of Flexbox, and we're going to get pretty detailed in those so that you really understand what's going on there. And then finally, we're going to look at a front-end mentor project, this testimonial grid over here, which we're going to be creating with Flexbox in the next video. A few of the things that we're not going to be covering: shorthand Flexbox properties. So there's a couple properties within this CSS, module or framework or whatever you want to call it, that allow you to write less CSS to achieve the same thing. And that's not our goal here. We're trying to learn Flexbox. You can apply those much later down the road when you're more comfortable with Flexbox. And we're also not going to be getting very advanced with this. I have written advanced Flexbox properties, but we're pretty much covering all of the properties. I guess probably the better way to say that is we're not going to be going into advanced Flexbox methods and different layouts and all of that kind of stuff. My main goal is to get you understanding how the system works and get you very comfortable with using it. The obvious starting question is, what is Flexbox? Well, if you have been following along, you might have realized that as we're writing our CSS, there's really two main components. You have layout-related properties, and then you have style-related properties. So a style property would be like a color or a font or something like that. It doesn't really affect how things are laid out on the page, but layout properties do. That's how you create, grids and, nav bars and footers and sidebars, all of that kind of stuff. So far, we have not been using Flexbox, and our job has been a little bit difficult because we've had to use hacky ways of getting layouts to work. Flexbox is going to come in and really help you out with that layout side of things. And per the MDN web docs, Flexbox is called the CSS Flexible Box Layout Module, and it's a model for displaying items in a single dimension, so either a row or a column. In future videos, we're going to get into CSS Grid, which is a two-dimensional layout module within CSS. And some, might say that CSS Grid is better than Flexbox or vice versa, but they really work together, and we're going to cover how those work together within our CSS. Whatever the case, Flexbox and then subsequently CSS Grid, which again is a future video, these are kind of the future of CSS layouts. So in the past, like I talked about, you had to use like floats and clear fixes and inline blocks and specific widths, and if you watched one of the previous videos, we had to almost, hack our way to getting items to fit within a container by removing white space from our HTML. These are not good solutions, they're not sustainable, and so Flexbox, along with CSS Grid, come in to provide a better model for doing layouts. But enough talk, let me show you exactly what we're dealing with here. So what I've got here is some basic HTML. And I really want you to start understanding this container-child relationship within HTML. So if we look at this, we can see that we have a div element with a class of container, and then we have three div elements all having the same class of item. This relationship is very important. The container is the parent to all three of these, children elements. To show you how this relationship is important, let's put some width and height dimensions. We'll go with 100 pixels for the width and height of the items within this container. And we'll give them a background color of, say, orange, and then maybe we'll give some margin of 5 pixels so they're kind of separate a little bit. So here you can see the 3 div elements. These are the children elements to that container. And the reason this parent-child relationship is so important is because the second you enable Flexbox on a container, all of the child elements become what we call flex items. So this is really important, and first off, let me show you what happens when we have the normal display property. So right now, by default, each item here and the container are all going to be a display type of block. So they're block elements, and you'll see as I type these in, it's not going to do anything because we're basically just explicitly writing in what was already the default. Now with block elements, as we talked about in prior CSS videos of the series, these are going to have certain characteristics, and flex items and flex containers are also going to have certain display characteristics. So if we remove this display block, which again, these are just defaults for div elements, and we come up to the container and we type display flex, you're going to notice that these items change. And the reason they change is because by adding this single property on the container element, or the parent, we are basically making a flex container which holds a bunch of flex items. The container and the items have specific characteristics that normal block or inline elements do not have. In just a minute, I'm going to explain exactly why these flex items are going in a horizontal direction rather than vertical. But for now, I really want to drill home this point about flex containers and flex items. Now you might ask, well, if I set display flex on this container and all of these are going to be flex items, then can I also, make the flex item a flex container? And the answer is yes. You can actually have an element be both a flex item and a flex container at the same time, and that's why it's important to always keep these relationships clear in your head. Let me show you what I mean. So if we come down to the final div element, which currently is just a flex item, and then we put in a few more divs. So let's put in a class of sub item, and then we're going to copy this down 3 times. And right now this doesn't have any dimensions, but if we copy this CSS selector of item down and then we put in sub item and give it some different dimensions, so we'll give it something very small, like maybe 15 pixels wide and tall, and then we'll make the background color blue and a margin of 1 pixel, something like that. And what you'll see is that these line up within that third container because they're children of this third flex item. But at the moment, these are not flex items themselves. They are block elements by default. This brings up a very important point. So if you look at our CSS, we have put the display flex property on this main container. And when we do that, it only turns that container into a flex item, and then the direct children, not all descendants, but only the direct children, will become the flex items. So in this case, all of these divs are going to be flex items, but the sub items are not going to be flex items. These will be the default block elements. Now, what I can do is I can come in and turn this final div into a flex container, which will then subsequently turn these sub items into flex items as well. Just so that I have a unique selector on here, let me turn this into item 3. We'll put another class on there. And then all we have to do is come down here on item 3 and write display flex. And what you'll see is these 3 blue boxes right here are going to go in a row just like the orange boxes are. As we go throughout this tutorial, I want you to keep this clear in your head, this exact model that we just laid out here. So let me just walk you through it one more time. At the top level, we have a div called with a class of container. This is a flex container, and the reason it's a flex container is because we put the display flex property on it. Now all of the items, these 3 items right here, these are flex items. And the reason they're flex items is because their direct parent is a Flex container. Now, these sub items right here, these are also Flex items, but it's not because we have display Flex on the main container, it's because we've put display Flex on this third item right here. I know this is confusing right now. It's going to get a lot more clear as we go through the tutorial, but what's happening here is this third div within the container is both a Flex container and it's a Flex item. So it can actually serve as both types at the same time. In relation to the main container, it is a Flex item. In relation to these sub items, it is a Flex container. With that level of understanding between the container and the Flex item and how we can combine those, here are the Flex container and Flex item properties that you can use. We're going to go through each of these, but you have to keep them very clear in your head when you're going through, because you have to first identify, am I dealing with a container or an item? And as you saw, in some cases, you can be dealing with both, so you can actually put a combination of these properties on a single HTML element. Sometimes this gets a little bit confusing, and something that I had done when I was first learning Flexbox is I had this cheat sheet that I found here. It's a really great resource. I'll be sure to link to it in the description. But I just keep this open whenever I'm working with Flexbox because it's very interactive. You can, click on different things and see how different Flex properties work. And it covers pretty much everything. Now, as I just mentioned, some properties apply to the container and some to the items. This resource does not really separate that out on the left side right here, but for each property, you'll come down and you can see what it applies to. So this one applies to Flex containers. So I'd use this resource, keep it open as you're learning Flexbox. It's a really good, little cheat sheet to have. In addition, as we've been going through in this course, you can always look it up on MDN Web Docs. So as you can see, we're on Flexbox, and here's the property reference for all of the valid properties that we can use. And you can click on each of them and kind of get an overview of what's available. And what I'll point out is this formal definition down here for each property is going to tell you what the initial value is. And sometimes that's important to understand what the default values you're dealing with are. The reason understanding these default values is so important is because when we have Flex items and Flex containers like this, putting this single rule on a container is going to set a bunch of properties by default that you're not seeing in front of you. In reality, when we put display Flex on this container, it's setting all of the properties that I just pasted in here. So it's setting a Flex direction, justify content, align content, items, and Flex wrap. And these are all of the default values, so you can see that nothing changed over here on the left because they were already applied by default. Likewise, Flex items have default properties. So I can come down to the item itself, which is going to be a Flex item, and paste in all of these properties right here. And the reason nothing changed on the left, again, is because these are the defaults that that Flexbox comes packed with. What we're going to do in this tutorial is learn how we can modify the default values on all of these properties right here to get the intended result that we want. The last thing I want to point out before we jump into our first property is just a quick note on shorthand Flex properties. So if we came down to the Flex item, so this is targeting one of our Flex items here, and we put in something called Flex, and we gave it a value of, 0, 1, and auto. This right here is what we call a shorthand Flex property, and it is the exact equivalent of writing Flex grow 0, Flex shrink 1, and Flex basis of auto. So these three properties written out longhand is the same thing as this single property written out shorthand. And for this tutorial, like I said, we're not going to be looking at these shorthand properties because we have enough to deal with the longhand properties, just understanding how they work. So just wanted to clarify that because you might see that in the Flex cheat sheet. So if you came down here, Flex flow is a shorthand property. I'm sure Flex is somewhere on here. But whatever the case, just know that those exist, but we're not going to be covering them. I think at this point I've covered all of these, prerequisite pieces of knowledge to really jump into Flexbox. Let's go ahead and get started. We're not going to use this because it's pretty ugly, and I actually put together a little demo here. So you can check out the JavaScript for this. It's basically just toggling some of the values here. And what this demo is meant to explain is the main tenet of Flexbox, and that is the fact that we have one-dimensional model where we can align items on either the horizontal or vertical axis. As you'll see in the HTML, we've got some HTML up here. None of this is really important. What we're really focused on here is going to be this piece right here. So we've got our main container, which is going to be our flex container, and then each of these divs are going to be the actual flex items. And I've actually styled these a little bit just for visual purposes, but it's not important to this tutorial. So if we're looking at this HTML, the way that we create a flex container of this div is by selecting it with CSS and writing display flex on it. So by default, that's going to create a flex container, and then all of the direct children are going to be the flex items. So all three of these divs right here. Now the next property that we have to understand, and this is a really important part of Flexbox, is the flex direction property. And this is by default going to be set to row. What this property is defining is what we're going to be using as the main axis and what we're going to be using as the cross axis. I've written this out with HTML and CSS, so you can see that this is the main axis horizontally, and this is the cross axis vertically. But what happens is if you change this flex direction property, you're going to change the flow of the items within the flex container. And when you do that, that's also going to change the main and the cross axis. So by default, this is set to row, which means everything is going to go horizontal and the main axis is going to be horizontal. But if we were to toggle this flex direction, which is going to, via JavaScript, change the flex direction to column, then what's happening is the main axis is going to be vertical and the cross axis is going to be horizontal now. So now we're looking vertically, while previously when it was set to row, we're looking horizontally. So as we learn new properties, keep two things in mind. First off, as we talked about, you got to know which HTML element is the flex container and which are the flex items. Number two, you have to know which direction the flex items are going to flow in. So if you've got this property flex direction set to row, they're going to go horizontal and the main axis is going to be horizontal. And if you set it to column, it's going to flow vertically and the main axis is going to be vertical. As you can see in this example, our flex container has a certain height and width, and the reason is because we set it down here. So if we find the container that we set it on, we set the width and height to 300 and 200 pixels. Now, if we comment these out, we get rid of the dimensions on the container, it's going to act similar to a block element where it kind of spans the width of its parent container, and then the height is going to be based on the content of the items within it. To keep things simple, we're going to keep this width and height set on our container just so that we can have a nice visual to look at as we explore some of the different flex properties. For the remainder of the tutorial, we're going to be working here in this workspace, and I want to just kind of derive how I got here just so that you're not confused with pre-existing styles that I put on here. So what I have is basically 4 div elements within a main container. And as of right now, what I'm showing you, there's no Flexbox enabled here except on these items right here, but that's not what we're trying to cover. So these are basic divs, and as of right now, they're displaying as block elements, and there's no dimensions on the container. So let me kind of derive how we get to our workspace. First off, I'm going to set a width and a height on our main flex container, and I'm going to put a border on it. So just uncommented those properties out, and what you'll see here is a black border that is 4 pixels in dimension, and then the width itself is going to be 408 pixels on the whole container. The reason that it's 408 is because if you add the left border of 4 pixels and the right border of 4 pixels, that gets you 8 pixels, and therefore what I wanted to do was basically make the total area within the container 400 pixels exactly, so that we have a better time doing, basic calculations. So that's why I made it 408 pixels. Now we have to uncomment the display flex to make these flex items. So now you're seeing that they're sitting, on the horizontal axis, and that's actually because of the flex direction row default setting here. And this is how we get to our basic workspace. And then finally, I will uncomment these 2 lines of HTML, which are going to be styled somewhere down here so that we can see the cross and the main axis at all times. And as we go through the rest of the tutorial, we're always going to be working with a flex direction of row. So therefore, the main axis is always going to be horizontal and the cross axis is always going to be vertical. If you want, you can switch this and call it flex direction column, and you can see how all of these rules that we're about to go through work out from a vertical axis perspective. The next few properties we're talking about are alignment properties, which allow you to align and space out these flex items within the container. The first one is going to be justify content. So if we come to MDN, here's the formal definition, and we'll come down to the formal definition here and see that the initial value is normal. If we read about what normal is, it says the items are packed in their default position as if no justified content value was set. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. It's all just kind of by default at the start of that axis. Now, similarly, if we set the justify content property to start, this is going to achieve the same thing. So we're just putting it at the start. So for all intents and purposes, you can think of the default property for justify content to be start. If we wanted all of the flex items to go to the end of the main axis rather than the start, we can just type that into this property. So if we replace this with end, you'll see that all of these jump to the right side. And you'll see that as we're looking on the main axis, that's how we're deciding where these items are going to go. We're flowing horizontally, so the start is the left side and the end is the right side. We can also change this to center, which is going to put them right in the middle. And then we have some additional property values that will actually space the items out a little bit. The first one is going to be space between. So if we type space between, these are going to be spaced out with equal amount of white space between them within the container. We also have a property called space around. So if we change this to that, you'll see that there is now some space surrounding each of these items on the main axis. Now what I'll have you notice here is that the amount of space between the items, so this little area here and here, those are all going to be equal in dimension. But the edges, so to the right of this fourth element and to the left of the first, that's a little bit smaller than the space between the elements. So that's kind of the how we distinguish the space around property value with the space evenly property value. So when I type space evenly, you'll see that these change just a little bit, and now what's happening is every piece of white space between the elements are going to be exactly equal. So the justify content property tells us how the items are spaced out and aligned on the main axis. Let's go ahead and set this back to start because I want to have the default values so that now we can talk about the next property, which is the align items property. Let's go ahead and look this up in MDN. We'll type in align items. And you'll see that this is the property that we use when we want to align flex items on the cross axis. So remember, we set this example to a flex direction of row by default, and that means that the main axis is horizontal and cross is vertical. So the align items always applies to the cross axis and is going to decide how these items are aligned vertically. Looking at the MDN docs, you'll see that the initial value is again normal. And if we go to normal, wherever that is, I guess it's at the top here, it says the effect of this keyword is dependent on the layout mode we are in. As you can see in the third bullet point, it says for flex items, the keyword behaves as stretch. And if we come down to stretch, it says the flex items are stretched such that the cross size of the item's margin box is the same as the line while respecting width and height constraints. That's an overly confusing way to say that by default, the align items, if we set it to normal, is going to stretch the height of these items to the total height of the flex container, unless you have a specific height set on those items already. So this brings us to a brief discussion on the width and height properties of flex items. Right now, we don't have any width or height set on either or any of these flex items right here. So they're getting, I guess, what you call the defaults. And with Flexbox, a flex item is by default going to get the width of its inner content, and the height is going to stretch to be equal to the total height of the flex container. As you can see, the inner content is going to be the numbers that we've put in here. And I know there's a little space there, but it's still considered just the inner content. And then the height is, of course, the height of the full flex container. Now, if we come down to flex item number 1, and we give it a width of, say, 100 pixels, it's no longer going to have that default width of the content. It's going to respect that width that we've set on it. Likewise, if we give it a height of, say, 50 pixels, it's going to respect that height as well. So if you put explicit width and height properties on your flex items, by default, they're going to get those so long as there's not, overflow within the flex container, or you've set different properties that we're going to talk about in just a bit. Just as a quick review, the items here, the flex items, do not have explicit width or height properties, and therefore the default height that a flex item is going to get is going to be the total size of the cross axis. So in this case, the main axis is row, cross is column, so total height of that column is going to be the natural height. This is no longer the case when we start putting in different values for the align items. So once we put in something like flex start, you're going to see that all of these items pull up to the top of the cross axis, and they no longer have that total height of the cross axis. And what's happening here is they just have the width and height of the inner content. So if we change that inner content, then it's going to adjust the size. So one way we could do that, let's say that we have this first flex item, we'll come all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to uncomment this little rule that I wrote that made the font size for this first item much larger. And you can see that as we make the content bigger or smaller, the flex item itself gets bigger or smaller because we don't have those explicit width or height properties. Now I'm going to leave that there because it's going to bring up a very good point here in a second. So right now we have flex start. We can also bring these down on the cross axis to flex end. So these are at the end now, and then we can center them with center. And this is actually something that's really hard to do without Flexbox, so really cool part of this Flexbox model. What you'll see with the center is that there's like an imaginary horizontal line going through the middle of the content in these flex items. But we also have this property value called baseline. And what's going to happen here is we actually draw that horizontal line kind of at the bottom of each piece of content within the flex item. So because this first one has much bigger inner content, our flex baseline is going to be in a different spot. So they're not going to be perfectly aligned flush with the top of that cross axis. So far, we've learned a couple of properties: justify content and align items. So we can play around with these. Let's just do a few examples so that we can kind of review and recap. So let's go ahead and say justify content will be center and align items will also be center. This is how you can take content, flex items, and put them in the middle of a container. And this was very difficult to do before Flexbox, so this is a really cool advantage of having Flexbox. And then we can, of course, change all of these. So we can put the justify content to end and put that there. We can also put align items to flex end. I don't know why you would want to do this, but you can put it at the bottom right corner of the container. So very flexible, no pun intended, of what we can do here with these alignment properties. Let me reset everything. Let's just put these back to the defaults. So all you have to do is delete them and they're back to their defaults. And then we will come down here and comment out this last rule that changes the font size of that first item. So now everything is equal. And what I want to do is actually make each of these items a specific width and height. We'll go with 50 pixels by 50 pixels. One way that we can do that, since we have two classes set here and each flex item has this FI class, we can just target that one class, give it a width of 50 pixels and a height of 50 pixels. And now we have these perfect little squares sitting as our flex items. By default, if you don't change any properties, Flexbox will respect the flex item width and height properties. So we set those to 50 pixels by 50 pixels, and that's what we're getting right here. And if we came down to the flex container again, and we set that align items property to say stretch or something like that, you'll see that they're not actually going to stretch down to the total height because we have those explicit properties set already. But the next thing I want to explore is what happens if you have too many or too little flex items within your flex container. In this example, if you remember from a few minutes ago when we talked about actually it's at the top here, we set the width of the flex container to 408 and the height to 200 pixels. Because the main axis is horizontal as a result of the flex direction equal to row property, the width is really all that we care about right here because everything is going in the width kind of direction. So we set this to 408 exactly for the example I'm about to show you. If you've got a container 408 pixels wide and that container has a 4 pixel border on the left and the right, then the total white space that is available for these flex items is exactly 400 pixels. If each of our boxes are 50 pixels in width, that means that we can fit a total of 8 flex items perfectly within this container. Let's go ahead and do that just to see what I'm talking about. So all we have to do is copy this down 4 more times, and you should see a bunch of items pop up here. Let me just go ahead and change the labels so that we can see all our flex items a little bit better. And now you can see that we have 8 items perfectly fitting within our flex container. But what happens if we take all of these flex items and we double it? So let's say instead of 8 flex items of 50 pixels each, we have 16. So we double it. What happens then? Well, let me go ahead and do that real quick. I'll just copy all of these items and paste them below. And what you're going to see as we extend this is that these items are overflowing outside of the flex container. There's a couple weird things going on as well. If you'll notice, it doesn't look like these items are 50 pixels wide anymore. Now, of course, if you were wondering how wide these elements are, you don't have to guess. You can right-click, inspect element, and you're dropped into the Firefox DevTools. And the reason I'm in Firefox, I know I've been switching back and forth between Chrome and Firefox throughout this series, but I'm in Firefox because the DevTools have an awesome Flexbox little module here that you can inspect elements with and really see what's going on. So all we have to do is come up to this inspector here. We click that so that we can select items on the page. And let's first start with our overall Flex container. When we click that Flex container, the Layout tab is going to drop us down into this section called Flex container. If you collapse that, you'll see that there's also grid in the box model. So these are different, models that we can look at. But if we look at Flex container and then we toggle this little button, you can see all of the different Flex items outlined for you, as well as some overflow space and other elements of the Flexbox. We'll turn this off for now. But we can also go down to the flex items, and you can see they're being highlighted here on the left as I hover over them. So you can click them with this little inspector here. So maybe we click on number 8, and we can look here within the inspector of everything that's going on with this individual flex item. We're going to talk more about all of this stuff in just a bit. We're not quite ready yet. The thing that I want to draw your attention to is the fact that if we go down to the box model, which we learned about in previous lessons, we know all about how this works, and you look at the total size of a single element. So we'll click on number 4. You'll see that the dimensions are 33.5 by 50, which is not what we set them to. We set them to 50 pixels wide and 50 pixels tall. So the question is, why is it shrinking the width? Like, we didn't tell it to do that. Why is that happening? Furthermore, if these are overflowing outside of the container, what do we do about that? We obviously don't want to show this to our users. We don't want our flex items just going indefinitely off the page. And especially if you're making, say, a grid of images where there's hundreds of images and you're using Flexbox to display them, you don't want them going on a single axis, indefinitely to the right or indefinitely down. In this situation, you have two options. The first option is kind of the standard default way of handling overflow in CSS. And this is not specific to Flexbox itself. You can use this with any type of CSS display type. So if I came to the Flex container and I set the overflow property, I can set this to a couple of values, but usually you might want to set it to auto. And if you set it to auto, what's going to happen is these elements are no longer going to break outside of that container. They're just going to scroll. So you see the scroll bar at the bottom of our Flex container now, and we can see all of our items. They're still shrunk a little bit, but we can see them all without, breaking out of the container. But like I said, with that grid of images example, if we could imagine that these are images, we don't want our users to have to scroll left and right to see all the images. We want them to just wrap down to the next line and just have like a nice little grid of images. So the second option that you have here, instead of setting the overflow property, which is just a generic solution, we can set this flex wrap property. And if we set it to wrap, you'll see what happens is these elements go back to their original size of 50 by 50 as we intended, and they're going to perfectly wrap onto the next line. Now you see some white space in here in the middle, and you might say, okay, I don't really want that. I want those to be flush to each other. So naturally what you're going to do is come down to the Flex container. You're going to type in align items like we had said earlier, and you'll type in flex start, something like that. And you won't see anything happen, and the reason is because the rules of the game just changed when we put in this flex wrap property. I know you're probably getting tired of hearing me say that, but as we go through CSS, certain properties set to certain values change the whole game. Just like when we set Flexbox to the container, it changes the behavior of all the children elements within it. This flex wrap property changes how we align items on the cross axis. So instead of align items, we now have to use this property called align content. So if flex wrap is set to anything other than the default, which is going to be no wrap, you'll see it overflows again. If it's set to anything except for this no wrap, then we're going to use, instead of align items, we're going to use align content, which is going to have the same possible values for the most part as align items, but it's going to tell Flexbox how to arrange this new group of wrapped items within the Flex container. So now we can set flex start, or we could wrap them at flex end, or even put them right in the center of everything. So that's how we wrap items to the next line if they're overflowing. At this point, we've actually covered all of the Flex container properties that we can use. Just to do a very quick review, I'll get rid of all this extra stuff here. So get rid of these last 8 Flex items, and then I'll get rid of these last 2 properties here. So just to review, we have, of course, the display flex, which is going to activate Flexbox. We have the flex direction, which we can set to either row or column. So if we set it to column, it's going to go vertical. If we set it to row, it's going to go horizontal. We have justify content, which aligns flex items on the main axis, in this case, the horizontal axis. We can set that to center, which is not going to change anything because it's as wide as the container itself. But if we just commented out this last flex item, you'll see how this works. It kind of centers all of the content in the middle. And then we have align items. We can also put center on that to put those in the middle. Next up, we're going to talk about how do we influence the size and alignment of individual flex items. So if you take a look at what I'm about to do, I can say something like align self, and I can say flex start, and you're going to see this first item drops out of the flow of the rest of the flex items, and we can do this with each individual flex item for a lot of different combinations here. Speaking of this alignment, let's go ahead and start with that because I think it's the easier part of this discussion. So let me just go ahead and comment out the last 4 items here in our container, just so that we have 4, and then within our rules here, I'm going to remove these justify content and align items so that everything is top left default settings. Now, if we came down to individual items, which I have CSS selectors here for on the right, what we can use is this align self property, which is essentially the same exact thing as align items, except it only applies to a single flex item. So in this case, we've set this to flex start, which is the default, so it all looks normal. But if I take this first flex item, so the first box here, and I set this to flex end, you'll see that this drops to the bottom while the rest stay at the top. And I can do this to flex item number 4. So align self, flex end, and you'll see this one drop to the bottom. And then maybe I wanted number 3 in the middle. So align self, center. So this one goes in the middle. You can see how we can individually pick and choose where our flex items are going to go. And of course, our container level properties still apply. So if I came back up to the container and set justify content to center, this whole group will go to the middle. So these work together. It's not one or the other. You use them in tandem. Like I said, the align self property is pretty straightforward once you know align items on the main container. Now the last part we're going to talk about is the sizing of flex items. And this is probably the hardest part of Flexbox, in my opinion, to understand how all of these work. And what we're dealing with here is the flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis properties. We're going to start with flex grow, and this is going to apply to flex items when they don't naturally fill the entire main axis. So in this case, the main axis is horizontal because of the flex direction row property. And in this case, we have 50 pixel wide flex items and we have 4 of them. So this should only fill about half of the total width of the container. Earlier, we talked about how the total white space, the total width for these flex items in this container is exactly 400 pixels. If each item is 50 pixels wide, then 50 plus 50 plus 50 plus 50 is going to be 200 pixels, and therefore the occupied space is going to be 200 pixels, and the unoccupied space is going to be 200 pixels. When there is unoccupied space or empty space along the main axis of a flex container, the flex grow property is going to come into play. By default, this property on each and every single item is going to be set to 0. And what that means is that each item by default is going to take up 0% of the empty space within the container. That is why what we're looking at here is not stretching out to fill the container right now, is because all of these items by default are set to not take up that extra space. But if I come down to the first flex item and I change that default property to a 1, you're going to see that the first item fills up all of that remaining space. So it's going to take up the original width it had of 50 pixels, and then we also know we had empty space of 200 pixels, So the total width of this first item or first flex item now is going to be 50 plus 200 or 250 pixels. Now, of course, with my tutorials, I don't want you to just take my word for it. So let's go ahead and verify what I just said. 50 pixels plus 200 is 250. So if we click the selector up here, select that element and go down to the box model, you'll see it's 250 and a half pixels. And the reason it's a half of a pixel more than what we calculated, I'm not sure that I can fully explain it with the utmost confidence, but I will attempt to. So if we set this back to flex grow of 0 and refresh the page because it's being stubborn, and then if we inspect the element, we'll go to this first element, and what you'll see in the box model is that the inner content of this, so the number itself, is 28.5 pixels. So if we hover over this, you'll see that the box gets drawn around that number. Now, if we pulled in the same exact HTML and CSS, but in Google Chrome, so I'm going to pull in Google Chrome right here, and we're going to select this first box and scroll down to the box model, you'll see that the inner content is 28, not 28.5. So browser differences are of course a big part of web development, but I wouldn't worry about that extra half that we saw when we're trying to make the calculations. Just make sure that you have the understanding of how these are calculated. In programming, being off by 1 is sometimes a catastrophic error, but when we're dealing with CSS, it's not quite as big of a deal. So we will stick with this, and as we go throughout, you're probably going to notice that my calculations are going to be off by just a couple decimals, but just bear with me. So let's set this back to a flex grow of 1. So we have 200 pixels of empty space. Now we don't, because 200 pixels got allocated to flex item number 1. Now if we came down to flex item number 2, which by default has a flex grow value of 0, and if we set that to 1, here's what's going to happen. If we came down here to flex item number 2, the default value for flex grow is going to be 0, no changes as you see. But if we were to set this to 1, you'll see that number 2 element gets part of that empty space as well. So now 1 and 2 are going to be completely equal. Now, how did we get to this? What kind of calculation is happening here? I'm going to try to draw it out for you. So if we come to right over flex item number 1 and just make a comment, what we're going to do is take all of the flex items within the container and we're going to add up their flex grow values. So by default, remember, they are all set to 0. So flex item number 1 has a value of 1 as we set it right here. Let me close this comment so we can see it correctly. So we have a value of 1 on flex item 1, a value of 1 on flex item 2, and then by default the last two are set to 0 and 0. So the total of all that is going to equal 2. And what you can think of this as is 2 units of empty space. So we'll say 2 units, and you might ask, okay, what unit are we measuring this against? Well, if you remember, there is 200 pixels of empty space, and if we divide that by 2 allocated units, we get 100 pixels per unit. So each unit that we allocate is going to be 100 pixels. But if we were to come down to flex item number 3 and set a flex grow value of 1, that changes it, because now our total sum, we're going to add a 1 in there, and now we have a total of 3 units. We still have 200 pixels of empty space, but now we have to divide that by 3 units, and that should get us to, not sure if I can do that math, I think that's a decimal actually, so 200 divided by 3 is going to be 66.666 pixels. But if we come down to flex item number 3, we set a flex grow factor of 1, and then flex item number 4 and set a flex grow factor of 1. Now everything changes, so we have to update these values in our sum. So now it's 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, so we have 4 units, and we still have 200 pixels of empty space to allocate, because if you have 4 items, each 50 pixels wide, that's 200 pixels. Empty space is 200 pixels in a 400 pixel container. So still have 200 pixels of empty space to allocate over 4 total units. So we'll divide that by 4, and that's going to get us to 50 pixels each per unit. So what's happening here is for each item in this container, we have an original size of 50 pixels, and then we allocate 50 pixels to that of empty space. So they're each going to be 100 pixels equal across the board. And you can see that if you click on here, it's 100.133 pixels. Forget about the decimals here, but they're all equal. So that's how that works. Now, it doesn't have to be a flex grow value of 1. You can also give it 2 or 3 or 4. It's all just dependent on how many units you want to allocate to each flex item. Let's say that we gave flex item number 2 a value of, we'll say 4. Or maybe not 4. Let's go with 3 so that we have an even number. So now our calculation is 1 plus 3 plus 1 plus 1 is going to be 6 units. 200 pixels of empty space divided by 6 units. I'm going to need a calculator for that one. So 200 divided by 6 is 33.33 pixels per unit. So if we are giving the second flex item 3 units of empty space, and each unit of empty space is 33.33, that means that we're giving it an extra 99.9999 or 100 pixels. So we take the original width of 50, we add about 100, so we get 150 pixels wide for the second item. Let's check that, see if we're in the ballpark, and you see that it's 150.25, so that calculation worked perfectly. Hopefully that explanation made a little bit of sense. You just have to think about it in allocated space, empty space, and you can calculate the two pieces by getting the total width of your flex container and then the total width of the items within the flex container, and then breaking it out into units based on the amount of empty space that we need to allocate back out to the items. Now the opposite applies when we have too many items in our flex container. Let me get rid of all these flex grow values so that we can get it back to normal. And then let me also uncomment these divs right here so that we have 8 total items. We know that that fits perfectly, but what if we put in 9? So instead of 8, we have 9, which means we've added an extra one in there, which means that we have 50 pixels of overflow. So remember, each one's 50 pixels wide. 50 pixels times 8 is going to be 400 pixels, which is equal to the total available space within our flex container. So by adding a 9th, we are making the total amount of flex items 450 pixels wide versus the 400 available space, so we have 50 extra pixels of overflow. Similar to how we allocate out empty space to flex items, we can also reduce the size of flex items by the amount of overflow that we have. So if you look at this container, you're going to see that by default, they all fit within the container when we add that 9th item. And the reason is because all of them actually shrunk a little bit when we put that 9th item in there. The reason that they shrunk is because by default, every flex item is going to have a flex shrink value of 1. So if I put that in for flex item number 1, you will not see any change because that's already the default. It's already shrinking by 1 unit. So we know how to calculate those units. You basically take the overflow, just like we took the empty space with the flex grow. So if we have 50 pixels of overflow, let's change this right here to 50 pixels of overflow. And then we have to ask ourselves how many units we're allocating that across. By default, each flex item is going to have a flex shrink value of 1, so that means that each flex item should be allocated equal overflow. In other words, we have to do 1 plus 1 plus 1 all the way to 9. So we have 9 total units. I'm just going to get rid of this because you get the point here. So we have 9 total units with 50 pixels of overflow. So we divide 50 pixels by 9, and that's going to give us, I believe, 5.33 pixels per unit. Let me check that real quick. So 50 divided by 9 equals, no, it's not 5.33, it's 5.55 pixels per unit. In other words, we're going to take the original width of these items, which was 50 pixels, and we're going to subtract off 5.55 pixels from that 50. So in theory, each item should be 44.45 pixels wide. So let's inspect the element. We'll go to any of these here, and you're going to see 44.5 pixels wide, pretty much exactly what we just calculated. Now this is where the Firefox DevTools comes in handy. So if you click on one of these items, it's going to pop up in the layout section exactly how this shrink operation worked. So you can see the flexibility has a flex shrink of 1, and that's going to say minus 5.5 pixels, which is what we just calculated. So it's going to take the 28.5 pixels, which is the inner content width, subtract off 5.5 pixels to get down to 23 pixels, and then you add back in the natural padding and border that is set on these items to get your total width of what we calculated as 44.5 pixels. Now this brings up a good point, because if you look at this model right here, you're going to see that each item has a minimum content width. So if you try to shrink something too much, then it's going to make it so that it will kind of get capped out. It won't shrink past the minimum value of its content. I'll show you exactly how this works. All we have to do is add in a few more flex items. So let's add one more for good measure. And what we see here is that they're clearly breaking out of that container now, just like we saw earlier when we looked at this and we tried to wrap them onto the next line. Now, from the flex shrink perspective, these are breaking out of the container because while they have, calculated the total overflow space and then allocated that out to each of the flex items, the total amount of overflow is going to be greater than the, basically it's going to make them shrink smaller than their minimum values, which is not possible. Let's see if we can calculate this just for fun. So we have 1 through 9, 10, 11, 12. So we have 13 total flex items, which are all supposedly 50 pixels wide. So if you do 13 times 50, let's see what that is. So that's 650 pixels. And if you subtract the 400 pixels that the container width is, you get 250 pixels. So our overflow that we're dealing with now is going to be 250 pixels, and we have 13 units to allocate it over. So we need to divide that by 13, and what that's going to give us is, let's see, 19.23 pixels per unit. So we're going to have to subtract, we're going to have to basically say, let me break down onto the next line just so we're clear. We're going to take the original width minus 19.23 pixels, and what that's going to equal is, let me see, 30.77 pixels. So theoretically, we would just take all that overflow and subtract it from the original sizes to get us to a total width of 30.77 pixels. But if we inspect element and we click on any of these here, you're going to see that this little min property popped up. So it says the minimum size of this element is going to be 12 pixels. So the minimum inner content is 12 pixels. And when you add on the padding and the border of each of these elements, that's going to break you over that value that we had calculated here. So it's basically going to be, the content itself is going to be too big to shrink that much. Hopefully I haven't lost you here. Try to lay out this in a logical manner. And I know this is a lot of detail. It's definitely not totally necessary, but I really think knowing this kind of stuff and how this is calculated is that extra step that you have to take as a developer to really understand what you're doing and be able to debug things and understand, okay, why is this breaking out of the Flex container? Why won't this shrink enough? You know, those kind of questions. Let's do one more practice problem here, I guess you could call it. So let's go back to 9 elements, which are going to naturally fit within this. But at the moment, they're each being allocated, what was it, 5.55 pixels, so 50 minus 5.55 to get it shrunk down to fit. Now, if we wanted to allocate it only to certain items, we can change the defaults. So let's go ahead and say that we want the first 3 items of this Flex container to keep their 50 pixel width. Now, the way that we would do that is we'd go to item 1 and we'd set a Flex shrink value of 0, which is not the default, and we'll copy that down to 2 and 3, and now you'll see that each of these get wider, and if we inspect them, they're each going to be 50 pixels wide, while the remainder are going to absorb that overflow space by shrinking. So just a quick review. If the total width of the items, the Flex items in the Flex container, do not equal the total Flex container, so if there's not enough items, Flex grow is going to be what applies, and that empty space is going to be allocated based on the Flex grow values. If the overflow happens, so if there's more items that can fit in the Flex container, then the Flex shrink will apply, and based on the Flex shrink values of each item, determines how that overflow space is going to be allocated out. The last property with all of this sizing that we have to talk about is Flex basis. Let me get our container back to a spot where we only have 4. So I'll just comment out those just in case we need them later. So now we have 4 items which are explicitly set to 50 pixels wide each. So we set each of them to 50 pixels wide, 50 pixels tall. Now, if we wanted to change those dimensions, we can actually do that using a Flex item property. Let's go to the first Flex item and set the Flex basis to equal 40%. What you'll see is that this first item gets a lot wider, and it's not because it's trying to fill the empty space, it's because it's respecting this Flex basis property over the width property that we set earlier. So by default, this Flex basis is actually set to auto, and when it's set to auto, what that is basically saying is to Flexbox is go ahead and look for the width and height properties, and if you find them, respect those properties as the width and height of the Flex items. If you don't find them, go ahead and size the Flex items based on the inner content, and that's the default for Flex basis. But you can also assign pixel units and percentage units to the Flex basis to override the width and height of your Flex items. This unlocks a lot of possibilities, and depending on how you use them with Flex grow and Flex shrink, you can get a bunch of different combinations. So if I was looking at this Flex box right here, I have the 4 items, each 50 pixels wide, and let's say that I wanted to make them even widths and span them across the whole container. One way that I could do that is by coming to each of the Flex items and setting the Flex grow to be equal to 1. And what that's going to do is equally allocate the empty space as we just talked about. So that's one way to do it. Now we could also backtrack a little bit, and instead of doing that, we can set the Flex basis to 25% on each of the items, and that's going to equally give width to each of the items and give you the same exact result. Now if we come in and try to set the Flex grow property on one of the items, it's not going to change because the Flex basis is going to take precedence over that. But in some cases, maybe you don't set the Flex basis property on all of the items to equal 100%. So in this case, we've given each of them 25%, which adds up to 100, so it's going to fill the whole container. But let's say that for the first item, we give it 10%. So we're going to be missing 15% of the container, and let me delete that for a second. So now we just have Flex basis properties, and they sum up to what, 85%, if I'm calculating that correctly. So there's some empty space here on the right. It doesn't fully fill the container. But now if I put on the Flex grow property and set it to 1, that first element is going to take the remaining space and we're back where we started. So essentially, setting a flex basis of 25 on the last 3 and 10% plus a flex grow of 1 is the same as just doing flex basis of 25% on all of them. So many ways to get to the same answer. The last thing we'll talk about is the order of the items along the main axis in our flex container. So if you wanted to change, swap these out, so maybe you wanted to put number 2 in number 1's place, you could do that. All you have to do is come up to the HTML and put number 2 before number 1. And that should just flip them. But in Flexbox, you don't even have to do that. You can actually flip those with CSS. So if I came down to the CSS and I looked at flex item number 1 and I gave it an order of 2, and then I gave flex item 2 an order of 1, now you're going to see that these are flipped. And hold on, I think the reason that this is not working is because you have to set them on all. So we'll set the order on 3 as 3 and the order on 4 as 4. So the 3 and 4 have their natural order, but then 2 and 1 are going to be flipped. So if you set order on all of the flex items, you can determine, the order that they come in. Now you might ask, why is this useful? Well, in many cases it's really not useful. You might as well just change the order of your HTML and be done with it. But if you are designing responsively, which we talked about in a prior video, I think it was just the previous video, as you're resizing your browser, you may want different elements on the page to go in different orders. So say you have a nav bar at the top, you've got main content, a sidebar, and a footer. Maybe you want to order those differently, whether you're on a desktop or a mobile device. And this would be how you would do that, is you'd set a media query. So you might come down and say @media, and we'd say like min width of 600 px or something like that. And then in here, you could probably set the flex item number 4 to have an order of 1. And then we'll say a flex item 1 will be in order of 4, something like that. So as we are getting bigger than 600 px, that's how that's going to show. But as we shrink it, you'll see that those flip. So we can resize and order them differently based on different screens. At this point, you've learned pretty much all of the main properties of Flexbox. Now, of course, there's some shorthand properties that can make your life easier. So instead of, setting the flex basis and the grow and the shrink values, what you can do is come in and just say flex, and then the first value is going to be the flex grow. So maybe you want to set that to 1. And then the second one's flex shrink, you might set that to 1, and then the third one is going to be flex basis, which is set to auto. So this is a shorthand way of writing flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis all in one line. So that's just a shorthand property, but not necessary. I wouldn't even recommend using those until you're very comfortable with Flexbox. Well, this is actually a brand new day, same hat, same hoodie, whatever, but I forgot to add the last part to this video, which is actually taking this previous challenge that we had solved. So as you're following along with the full stack roadmap, we solved this pricing card challenge as a part of the original HTML and CSS tutorials, and then also made it responsive in the prior video on responsive web design. What I want to do to wrap up this video is take this design and make it with Flexbox instead of how we did it before. So if I'll remind you just for a moment, what we had to do to get these bottom left and bottom right sections sitting next to each other with a 50% width was something a little bit hacky. If we come up to the HTML, you'll see right here. So this line doesn't look, all that spectacular, but what you'll see is we've got a closing div right here that corresponds to the bottom left section div, and then the starting div for the bottom right section is sitting right next to it, which when you're looking at HTML, that's generally not very good syntax, and that was kind of a hack that we used to remove the white space and allow for the fact that we had 50% widths on both of them. So if I were to enter this down one line just for formatting's sake, you'll see that the bottom right piece of the card actually disappears, and that's because it's going underneath that bottom left card, and then we're hiding the overflow, as you'll see in the CSS for the main card. So we've got overflow hidden. So if we take that off, you'll see it pop up below here. So that's what's going on, and we can solve this very easily using Flexbox and get rid of all of our hacky solutions that we had before. Now, to make this a little bit simpler for us to see exactly how this is working, let's go back to our layout example. This is what we had used to originally build the card so that we could see what we were dealing with and we didn't have to confuse ourselves with all of the different styling while we're just trying to focus on layout. It isn't pretty, but it will work for our layout purposes at least. And what you'll see is I've come down and added a media query. This is from the prior video. If you haven't watched that, we talk about responsive design and media queries. So basically what we're saying is in this block, we want to apply certain styles to any device that is greater than 500 or greater than or equal to 576 pixels. As you'll see when we shrink this, it changes the layout, and then when we go above 576, then these two style selectors will apply, and you'll see that the width and the height of the card gets applied, and then the bottom left and bottom right section are going to get a 50% width each. Now with Flexbox, this is relatively simple. All we have to do is, if we're looking at this entire card here, it's composed of a top section and a bottom section with two left and right sub-bottom sections. And what we want to do is on the desktop device, so this, what we're looking at right here, we want to have those bottom sections in one row. And then when we shrink it to mobile, we want it to come into a column. So if you remember from just a few minutes ago, we talked about the flex direction, where we can take the main axis and change it based on that flex direction. So what I'm thinking is that for a desktop device, we want flex direction equal to row so that these two go right next to each other. And then on a mobile device, we want it to be in a column. So the way that we do that, since we're designing mobile first here, is we come up to all the main styles here and we go to the bottom section, because that's what we want to turn into a flex container. We don't necessarily want to turn the whole card into a flex container because the top section is actually fine and it would be overkill to put a Flexbox container on it. But the bottom section is not. So let's go into the bottom section and type display flex. And what you'll see is, I believe nothing will happen at the moment because we're in the desktop view, but let's go ahead and go to the mobile view, and now we've got some things messed up because we're designing mobile first, so right now we're working on the mobile device. So these are still sitting next to each other, and all we have to do to change that is set the flex direction to column. And you'll see that they jump right above each other. That's pretty much it when it comes to the mobile design of this. Let's see if we can find anything that we can remove now. I believe we can remove this vertical line. Okay, we're going to get to this. We'll actually get to this. Let's get the design right first, and then we will worry about that. So at the moment, we set the flex direction to column, and because of that, because we're designing mobile first, that is also going to apply to the desktop design unless we change it in our media query. So let's do that. We'll say bottom section, and we'll give it a flex direction of row again, so the default. So now as we resize, we get a very similar result, and we're actually pretty much done. But we have some redundant styles that we can actually remove now that we're using Flexbox, and this is where the nice parts of Flexbox come in. You don't have to write as much CSS. So we can remove the bottom left and bottom right section widths, and I believe that may screw us up a bit. after we change a few things. Hold on. I think we need to change, let's remove the display inline block on the bottom left section and the bottom right. We will remove the 100% width, and we'll remove the vertical align top. So we don't need those anymore. But what you'll notice is now we've got this screwed up, and that is by design. That's not surprising. Let's make sure our mobile is still working. So we're good here. Mobile's still working, but desktop has a little bit of work. And if you remember, the bottom section is our Flex container, which means, based on the HTML here, if we're looking at it, the bottom section has two direct children. It has the bottom left section and the bottom right section. And we can actually enter this down on to its new line. Now that we're using Flexbox, we don't have to have that hack. But anyways, the bottom left and right section are the children. So therefore, these two style selectors are going to be the Flex items. In this desktop view, we have the Flex direction set to row, which means that that bottom section has a main axis that is going horizontal. And if you remember from a few minutes ago, the way that we resize the Flex items along the main axis is going to be one of two ways. We can use the Flex Grow property, or we can use the Flex Basis. So let's come in here and just try both of them, just so I can show you. We'll start with the Flex Basis. It may be a little more straightforward. So if you put in 50% on the bottom left section, and then you say Flex Basis 50% on the bottom right section, we have completed the card. It looks great, and as we resize it, it's still going to work. So that's one solution. Another solution is we could come in and we could say Flex Grow, set that equal to 1, and Flex Grow equal to 1 on the bottom right section. And this should work just fine too. Now, going directly from Flex Basis to Flex Grow will not really illustrate that point. Let's get rid of the Flex Grows for just a second so that we can conceptualize. By default, these two sub-containers down here have a natural width because we haven't given them an explicit width, so they're going to take the content width. The content sitting within them, as you can see, is filling the entire width of their container. Now, these do not fill up the entire section. We've got this empty space here on the right. And the Flex Grow property is what applies when we have that empty space. And so basically what we're going to do when we enable the Flex Grow 1 properties, like we talked about, is we're going to split up that space, just give it 1 unit to the bottom left section and 1 unit to the bottom right, and therefore it's going to be, I believe, perfectly equal. Or it actually may not be perfectly equal. It may just be a coincidence that the content is a similar width. Let me make sure that that's correct. So let's just enable these and we can check in the dev tools. So let's inspect and let's see what we're dealing with. So this one is 263 pixels wide. This is 276 pixels wide. So glad we looked at this. I actually was not thinking about this correctly. The correct solution here is probably going to be the Flex Basis of 50%. It just looks like they're equal when we use the Flex Grow because they're similar widths by default. Like naturally the content has a similar width in both sections. But if I close out the dev tools, and let's say I came up here and just added a bunch of content to one of the list items in the bottom right, you'll see that now that Flex Grow is not working quite as well because we're not giving them equal widths, we're growing them based on their natural size. So I stand corrected, that is not the correct way to do it. Flex Grow, at least. I think Flex Basis is by far the most reliable way to split these into equal containers. So we'll go with that and call it a day. I think we have solved this to my liking. So this is the basic layout, and then as we shrink it, it goes down to mobile. So as we come over to here, back to our card, and let me bring this guy back up so that we can see everything working okay. So there's our card. Now we got to turn this into a Flexbox, and we'll do exactly what we just did in the layout example. So if you remember, we came down, we didn't need any of that. We did need a bottom section. We wanted the flex direction to be row on a desktop device. And then in the bottom section, we need to display flex, set the flex direction to column. And let's see what we got here. Looks good. Now we just wanted to remove on the bottom left and bottom right sections. I know there's a lot more styles here. We don't need this guy. We don't need the vertical lines. We don't need the width. All we have to do is add a flex basis of 50% on each of these. So we're looking good there. And I believe we have solved it. I don't think there's anything that we did otherwise. Now there's just one more thing that I want to show you with this that we could use Flexbox for. As you see this $29 per month, these are sitting next to each other. And whenever you have horizontal content, it's usually a decent use case for Flexbox. Let's look at the HTML that we set this up with. So you'll see that we have a price container. That would be the overall parent, and then that parent has two children items. So if we turned price container into a flex container, then the price and the price frequency would therefore become the flex items. Let's find that in our CSS. So here's the price container. We've just set a margin on it, so that's probably going to stay the same even with the flex container. But then we also have price and price frequency, which looks like we have styled right above it. So let me just change the order of this because it makes a little more sense to have the container on top. And what we're going to do is set display flex. By default, it's going to be set to row, so it will put them next to each other. Let's get rid of all the styles that we have within these. I don't think that we need any of them except for maybe the font size and the opacity, because those are not layout related properties. So here's our starting point, and you can see that by default, even after we removed all those styles, that display flex, making that whole container a flex container, is going to still put them next to each other. Now let's just back up and remember exactly what's going on here. We have some HTML where we have a price container, and then we have two items within it. So we have a flex container and two flex items. By default, we've set this to display flex, which makes the main axis on the horizontal, so in a row. And therefore, if we want to align things along the main axis, we use justify content. If we want to align them on the cross axis, we use align items. As you can see, the per month is a little bit misaligned with that $29. An easy way to fix that is to come onto the price container, set the align items, and set those to center. You'll see that that perfectly centers those two right next to each other, and that's a much better solution than what we did before, where we set the position to relative and then we set it -3 pixels to just pull it up a little bit. The last thing we have to do, as you'll notice, there's no spacing between these, and there's no real solution here with the Flexbox. I mean, we could come in here and justify content and say something like space between, but you'll see that that's going to space it out way too much. So that's not really going to help us. So really the best way to do this is just come on to the either the price frequency or the price item and set a margin. So we don't even need this style anymore. Since this is already written, the price frequency, we can just use this, and all we have to say, because this is the per month piece, all we have to say is margin left and give it something like 5 pixels. And that spaces it out nicely, very easy and straightforward. So there you have it. That is how we solve this with a mobile first fully responsive solution with Flexbox, and it shrinks and gets bigger, and it looks great on all devices. In this video, we're going to be building a testimonials grid, and we're going to be doing it with a mobile-first responsive design solution, and we're also going to be using Flexbox. My goal in this video is to not only solve this challenge on Frontend Mentor, but also to apply those skills that we've learned in previous lessons so that you can really start to use them in the real world. Lastly, I'm going to be adding in a few extra pieces to the puzzle. So throughout this series, we have been using CodePen, which is just a nice environment where we have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in one place, all hooked up and ready to go. Since this challenge is relatively straightforward, and you'll see as we walk through it, I want to also add in the concept of a code editor. So we're going to be downloading and using Visual Studio Code. And then we're also going to be doing a little bit of version control. And I'm not going to get super detailed into it quite yet, but I'm going to show you the commands that you have to run to get your design pushed up to GitHub and deployed to the GitHub pages so that you can, share a URL with others of what you built. But don't worry, the only prerequisites that you really need are going to be HTML, CSS, and make sure you've watched my Flexbox and responsive design videos. Let's get started. If we come up to Frontend Mentor, this is the challenge that we are going to be creating. And I've already started it, so I don't need to click here. So let me go to my challenges, or I guess profile, my challenges, and then testimonials grid section. So from here, you can download the starter files. So we'll do that. It's going to pop up on another screen for me. So once you've downloaded your files, make sure that you have Visual Studio Code downloaded. It's just a code editor. And I actually made a whole video on code editors. You can check it out up here of which ones I recommend and why. So obviously Visual Studio Code would be one of those. So go ahead and download that. And once you've downloaded it, open up a brand new window. From here, you're going to want to click File, open a folder, and then go find the testimonial challenge starter pack that you just downloaded. So I've got it selected. And this is going to open me up into the workspace. As we start looking at the starter files, if you open up index.html, which is what we're going to actually be working on, you can see that there's all sorts of text already in here. And luckily, we have a lot of the testimonials that we will need. They're not really implemented in HTML elements, but it's good to just have this text ready to go. Now, just to relate this back to what we've been using with CodePen, this index.html is basically the same as this HTML box here in CodePen. It's just on our local computer. It's in our local file system rather than up in the cloud. Now, your first question is probably, well, how do we actually view this HTML document in the browser? Now, remember, HTML and CSS, they are only displayed in the browser. Therefore, we need a web browser to look at this. The way that we do that is you actually have a couple options. I'll show you the most bare bones option first, and then we'll go into what we're actually going to be using to solve this challenge. To view an HTML document in the browser, all you have to do is go to your File Explorer. I'm on Windows, but this works the same on Mac or Linux. And just go to the folder that you have it saved in, and then find the index.html file. You'll notice that it does not say index.html as you see over here, and that is because the file type over here is Chrome HTML document, so it doesn't display it here in the name. If you right click and go down to Open With, you can choose a browser to open it in. So I might just say Google Chrome, and when we click that, it should have opened it up. If I go back to my browser, it should open it up in Google Chrome. And there's a lot of text here, and that's because we have to actually implement this design, but this is the HTML document that we're looking at. And you can see up in the URL bar, we're actually looking at our local C drive. Now on Mac and Linux, this is going to look a little bit different, but it's the same concept. It's just the local path to that file displayed in the browser. Now I'm going to point out a few things here that might be interesting to you. The first thing, you see this little icon up here in the top left portion of the tab. This is a little Frontend Mentor logo or favicon. And you might be wondering, well, how did that get there? Well, the way that we put that there is if we come back to our files and we look at this link tag right here. This is actually putting in that favicon up into the title. Here's some metadata about it, some sizing, but here's the really important attribute, which is the href. And what we've passed in is a relative path. We'll learn a lot more about absolute and relative paths coming up when we start working in the terminal a little bit more. But all this is saying is I want to look relative to the current directory into the images folder over here, and then drop that down and grab me the favicon 32 by 32 PNG, and we can open that up and see the little icon that we have, and that matches the icon that we see up in the tab. Furthermore, in the index.html, we've got the doc type. That's important for just HTML boilerplate. And then I'm actually going to indent this for us so that we can see it a little bit better. We have the head tag, which is pretty standard for an HTML document. Here are some meta tags that help with displaying the site in the browser properly. These are just pretty standard defaults that you might put in. And then, of course, the link we just talked about. Now, the title tag, this is where we actually name the tab that it's going to open in. So we can change this and just say, instead of Frontend Mentor, we can just say Testimonial Challenge. And when we click Save, open the browser up, and click Refresh, you'll see that it changed to Testimonial Challenge. Right here we have some styles. We haven't really been looking at this, but if you come back to our browser and go to CodePen, the CSS right here, there's a couple ways that you can link that up. You can actually use a link tag to link up styles, or you can just put them all in a style HTML tag right here. Now, we're not going to do that because that's not very good practice for a good amount of CSS. You want to break it out into a separate file, which is what we're going to do. So we'll delete all of that. We don't need it. And then finally, we have all of this text, which is basically, if we look at the challenge itself, I wish there was a better way to see this. Oh yeah, we actually have the design here. So if we go to the desktop design, you'll see that we have all of the text, and all this text is right here. I'm going to cut this out, and then I just want to make a new file, so I just right-clicked over here in the file pane, click New File, and we'll just say placeholder text.txt. So if we give it the .txt file extension, it's just a plain text document. We can paste that in and save it just so that we have it, but it doesn't clutter up our HTML. This last part, the attribution, this is just, as we look at it in the browser, it's just this little piece down here. So you can, if you want to, you can go ahead and fill this out and link to whatever you want to, your Twitter account, your LinkedIn account, your GitHub account, whatever you want to do. I'm going to delete it here. I don't really want to clutter up anything. I want to just focus on the challenge itself. So at this point, we have a basic HTML boilerplate. And I'll actually show you a shortcut to get to pretty much exactly this with just a few keystrokes. Let's save this. I'll right-click, create a new file, and we're going to call this test.html. because we're just going to be testing a few things. Within this document, I'm going to show you how to use Emmet. And what Emmet is, if we open it up, this is built into Visual Studio Code. And what you basically can do with it is type shorthand, characters and click Tab, and it will extend it out into a code snippet of what you want already. So let me just give you a brief example. If we wanted in this HTML document, you can see Visual Studio Code has identified in the bottom right that this is an HTML document. So if I type H2, it's going to pull up this box that says emit abbreviation. And you can click it to see what it's going to abbreviate to. But really, all you have to do is click Tab, and it's going to extend it out into the element that you want, and you can just start typing. Similarly, we can actually get this entire HTML boilerplate in just a few keystrokes. So if you type HTML, and we have a couple options here, and you can go through and see exactly what it's going to create. So basic HTML will just give you the main tag. We want something a little better than that. Oops, I already did it on accident. The HTML5, let's go ahead and see what HTML5 gives us. It's going to give us pretty much everything we want here, just like we saw earlier. And then finally, HTML, XML. This is not something that you're probably going to use very often. So if we just click HTML5 or scroll to it with our arrow keys and press Tab, it's going to break us out into this boilerplate, which is very similar to what we were set up with when we downloaded the starter files for our Front-End Mentor Challenge. So that's just a handy way to create this, and then of course you can change the title. I don't think there's a link tag for the favicon set up by default, but you've got all the meta tags that are necessary, and you're all set. As we go through this challenge, I'm going to be using those emit snippets, and I'll try to mention it as we go along, but just know that that's going on. For now, I'll delete the test file. We don't need that any longer. And now let me show you our workflow. So what we could do is just write some HTML, so H2 tab, and then some title. That's just basic HTML, and click Save. And then we can Alt Tab or switch back to the browser, open up the tab that we have it on and click Refresh, and you'll see the new HTML document. This would be very cumbersome, and it's not a great way to make everything fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to split the screens here, and I'm going to put the Visual Studio Code on the left and the testimonial challenge on the right. Now obviously we don't have a lot of room here, so you can always click this right here to collapse that. Might make this a little bit smaller for us. And then when we're working with our dev tools, we'll click Inspect. We're in Chrome right now. You can use Firefox as well if you want. Since we've got these side by side, I'm going to actually redock all of this stuff to be at the bottom. So I can do that. Let me remember where I can do that. Let's click. There we go. You click these three little dots and click this dock to bottom. So now we have a much wider screen to work with. And as you resize this, in the top right corner, you can see what screen size you have. Or you can click the toggle device toolbar, and now we can see it more explicitly, where we can resize the screen up here. So this is probably going to be the better option for us. And we can change the zoom to, let's say, be 75% so that we can see it a little bit better. And let me zoom out just a tiny bit. We don't need the JavaScript console because we're not working with JavaScript, so we can close that drawer. And now all we have is the elements here on the left, so the HTML, and then the styles on the right, or the CSS. And if we click this Select an Element button and we select that H2, we can locate it within the HTML document and then see the relevant styles down here. So that's going to be our workflow, and as we go through this, we can just add new elements, some text, click Save, come over here and click Refresh. And now you see it's been added to the document. Now there's just one more thing that I want to do, and it's just going to make this whole workflow just a little bit nicer. We're going to come into the extensions piece. Let me just expand this out for us. We'll go to the extensions tab within Visual Studio Code, and let's type in live server. Now, live server is a way that we can get automatic updates every time we click save on our HTML and CSS documents. So let's install this. It's very easy to install extensions in Visual Studio Code. So you can see it's installed. I think that's all we need to do. So this is just another tab that's been opened up. Let's close it. We don't need it. We'll close this out as well. And then all we have to do to get this live server working is come down to the bottom right of our screen and click the Go Live. And it's going to pop up a security box. You need to allow access. And now what you'll see is that we've got a different address. This is actually, we'll get into this a lot more later in the series, but 127.0.0.1, that's our local host. And then 5501 is the port that we're serving it on. And we're serving the index.html document. Now, if we put these next to each other, close this out, and add another, piece of text. So more text. And once we click save, you'll see that it immediately gets updated here in the browser. That's going to be incredibly handy for us. We don't have to go back and forth clicking refresh every time. And it's also really nice because instead of going to your file folder and right-clicking and opening with a browser, you can just do it directly from Visual Studio Code. I know that was a very long kind of introduction to get us started working on this project, but as I've been trying to do within this full stack series is just take you through every single step. So we're not leaving anything out. We're going through absolutely everything, and that's why I wanted to show you the extensions, the Emmet abbreviations, the favicons, the meta tags, all of these little details, because as I was learning, I always wondered about them, and oftentimes tutorials would just skip right over them. But we are finally ready to start the actual challenge and start building that testimonials grid. The very first thing I'm going to do, and this is what you should always do, is link up your CSS document. If I open the File Explorer, you'll see that there is no CSS available to us yet because we haven't created it. So go ahead and right-click, create a new file, call it styles.css or whatever you want it, doesn't really matter. This is just a convention. Once you have styles.css, let's just go ahead and put in a basic style. So we'll use the wildcard that selects all elements and we'll give it a color of red. And the reason we do this is just to verify that everything is working correctly. When we click save, you'll notice nothing happens here. And the reason nothing happens is not because our live server's not working, it's because we haven't told the index.html document that we need to grab that style sheet. So let's use an Emmet abbreviation. We'll type link, and you can see all sorts of different links that you can use. And if we go down to CSS, click tab, you'll see that we have a CSS link set up for us. And since we are in the same directory, so index.html and styles.css are in the same directory, we can just use this exactly. So it's saying style.css, and just to stay with convention, I actually think it should be styled, not styles. Let's just rename it to style.css over here, and then save the HTML document. You'll see that immediately the text color updated to be red. So we know that our link to our style.css is working. If you put in, something like styles.css and click save, not going to work anymore. So that's what's going on there with that link tag. And for those of you who have been following along with the series, if we come to CodePen, what we just did there was we hooked up the CSS and the HTML. By default, when you're in CodePen, you can just type HTML and type CSS and they work together. But when you're not working in CodePen, which honestly most of the time as a developer you won't be, you have to actually come in and link them up with the link tag. Alright, so let's get started here on the layout. We'll close the file pane for just a second, and if you look at the desktop design, you'll see that we'll have to kind of flip back and forth. Or what we can do is we can split these editors. So I believe we can split down. And now we can close this top one. And we have the index.html at the top and our desktop design at the bottom. It's kind of small, but it will at least give us a general feeling for what kind of layout we need. If you're like me and get kind of annoyed with all this text flowing off the screen, just click View, toggle Word Wrap, and then everything wraps to our view. I kind of like that, so we'll go with that. And to start us off, let's see what we're dealing with here with the grid. So the first step to solving any HTML and CSS challenge, or just building a web app in general, is to get the layout correct. And we saw that in previous lessons and challenges that we did, where we just put a border on each of our div containers, and then we did the layout, and then we filled in all of the content and styles. So we're going to do the exact same thing here, and you'll see it's not going to be all that complicated. Now, the most obvious place to start, if we make this a little bigger, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 containers, and they all have slightly different styles. It looks like the 2 white containers here may have the exact same style, but for now, let's just give them all a unique ID so that we can select them with CSS a little bit easier. So to do that, with Emmet abbreviations, you can actually just type the hashtag and then whatever ID you want to give it. I'm just going to number these, so we'll say testimonial-1 and then click tab, and you see what it does is it gives an ID attribute on a div. So that's what by default, if you use the Emmet abbreviations to put a hashtag and then type something, or if you put a dot and then type something and press tab, it will give you a class. So that's just a quick shortcut. So we'll go through and we'll do the same thing here. So we'll say testimonial-2. And then another useful thing in Visual Studio Code, if you go to the end of a line, click Control-C to copy, and then Control-V, it will just paste them down. So there's our 5, and then we can come in here and give this a 3, a 4, and a 5. So we now have all of the containers that we need. When we click Save, everything's going to disappear up here because we just have empty div containers. That's okay for now. The next thing that I'm looking at here, normally I just put a border on everything and make a layout, but this is already kind of a grid, and we might as well start filling in the colors as backgrounds so that we can see what we're dealing with. And then additionally, we probably need to start looking at the mobile design because we're doing this mobile first. So I know this is going to clutter the screen up a little, but let's go ahead and open up the mobile design in the bottom part here. Close this back out. And here you'll just see that every card is going to be stacked directly on top of each other, but they're going to look relatively similar. So here's the desktop, here's the mobile. It looks like on the mobile design, the cards themselves for the grid items or testimonials are going to be the height of the content. So the items with more content are going to be taller than the ones with less. So probably the best way to lay this out at the beginning is to just grab some of this content and put a background on there and just start getting the structure of everything. So let me pull this down. I know that's really small, but we'll work with it. And here in testimonial number 1, I'm just going to put a small amount of content because I don't want our HTML document getting super busy with a bunch of text yet, because that'll take away from the concepts we're trying to learn here. So let's go to the placeholder text, and maybe we'll just grab this really short line of text and we'll put that in a paragraph tag. So we'll just copy it there and click Save. We still have red text. I don't really want that. So let's replace this all selector. Instead of color red, we'll do box sizing border box, because that's our basic CSS reset that we want to do. We want to set all box sizing to border box. So now we got the right text and all of our box sizing is good. Let's resize the screen so that we actually have the browser on the right mimicking a mobile device. So this isn't perfect. I don't know, this is probably not exactly a mobile device. Let's make it even a little bit smaller. Gives us more room to type anyways. But this is close enough, and this is what we're gonna build our mobile design off of. As we talked about in the responsive design video, 576 pixels is kind of our standard mobile device. So anything 576 or below is going to be considered mobile. So that's roughly what we're looking at here. And if you right click and inspect, and then you click this little icon right here to get the full screen, you should be able to see exactly how wide it is. So if we just typed window.inner width, we're at 584. So if we wanted to hit that 576 number or a little bit lower, it'd be right about here. So we'll keep the screen size right here for now, and then as we go up to the desktop design, we'll make it a little bit wider. I'm going to copy this same text just so that we have something into each of these additional testimonial divs. And now we're going to have some text to work with. And then let's look at these colors here. So how do we know what colors to use? Well, we have some starter files, and if we go to the styleguide.md, it's going to give you layouts and then colors right here. So this is where we're going to find the colors that we need. So if we come down to the colors, we see all of them listed in HSL format, and you can use that in CSS, but it's not my preferred way of doing it. And honestly, I haven't seen a whole lot of developers that use HSL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert these to hex codes, and that way we can work with what I'm comfortable with and probably what you'll see more often. Just as a reminder, this is how I'm doing it. I just typed in RGB to hex, and then you get this tool that Google has, and you can just basically come in here, grab an HSL value, paste it into this box here, and then copy the hex code and replace it here. So that's all I'm doing. All right, I've got these all replaced here. So we've got hex values, a little bit more comfortable for most people to be using. And we've got a couple notes on the text colors, but I think these are mostly related to the text itself, so we'll get there a little bit later. I'm going to drag the style guide down to this bottom portion of our Visual Studio Code screen, just so we can have it as a reference. Now it looks like the background of the entire screen is going to be a light gray. So we'll start with that. If we go to our style.css, in addition to the box sizing, we also want to set margin 0 and padding 0 on everything, just so that we don't have any unintended side effects. So when we click save, you'll see that everything gets smushed together because we just excluded the margin and padding that's by default set on a paragraph element in the browser. And now we'll come down here and we'll say on the body, we want the background color to be, I believe, the light gray or the light grayish blue. We'll see which one looks more similar. So there's the light gray. That is definitely too dark. And there is the light grayish blue, which I think that does match, if my eyes are not playing tricks on me. I think the background here matches pretty well. So I think we got that right. So we got the background covered, and now we can start filling out our containers themselves. So each of them, again, has an individual ID. Let's template those out. So testimonial 1, and then we can copy this 5 times. We may not need all of these, but we'll just have them out here for the start. Or actually, of course, we'll need all of these. They're all different colors. So the first one is this purple, the purple card here. So we need to grab that color from the style guide. I believe the moderate violet is what we're looking for. So we'll come up to testimonial 1 and give it a background color of that. And now when we click save, you should see that background color. Now the next one that we're looking for is, it looks like kind of a darkish gray. So very dark grayish blue. I think that's the one that we want. So we'll come to testimonial 2 and do the same thing. And then for the rest of these, I don't want to waste your time. I'm just going to go and kind of guess and check until I get the background colors correct on each one of these pieces to this grid. But the one thing I will say before I speed through this is the numbering of these. So we've got them numbered 1 through 5, but you may be wondering which is 1 and which is 5. For reasons that you will find out later as we design this with Flexbox. This top one will be 1, then 2, 3, 4, and then the one on the right is going to be the 5th one. So just know that as I'm going through and styling the backgrounds on each of them. All right, I've got all the background colors filled in here. And as you'll see in this mobile design that we're trying to make, there's some room between the edge of the screen and these items within the grid. And what we're going to do to create that is we're going to actually wrap all of these items in one big container. And then we're going to set some padding on that container to bring all of them inwards a little bit. So we'll go to the index.html to do that. And right now, all of these divs are just sitting within the body. But we're going to say we want to create a ID of testimonial grid container. We'll just be very specific with it. Grab the closing div down here and paste it in. So now we want to select this testimonial grid container and put this in our styles. So hashtag, grab the ID, and now we want to set some padding. You can either set it in percentage or pixels. For this, since we're going to be making it responsive, I'm going to start with a percentage. So usually about 2% works pretty well. You can see that you get a little bit of padding there. But of course, when we look at the mobile design and make this bigger, there's a little more padding on the top than there is on the sides. So we can actually use the shorthand padding property to say we want 2% and then maybe 5%, and we'll save that, and I actually got that wrong. So the top and bottom is going to be the first argument, and then the left and right will be the second. Let's bump that up to 3, see what we got. This looks pretty good. So I'll stay with this. I'm fairly satisfied with the spacing that we have here. Something that is really bothering me right now is the text color on these darker backgrounds. So before I get too mad, let's just go ahead and fill that out. So for the first one, we'll need a white text color. So we'll throw that in there. And then we also will just copy this down for testimonial 2. We're good on 3, good on 5, but we'll also need it on 4. And now you'll see that the text is popping out a little bit better. But it's all crammed together, so we need to space things out just a little bit. As you see in the mobile design, there's not only a little bit of space around the inner content of each grid component, but there's also some space between each grid component. On a mobile device like this, a simple way to add the spacing between them is to just set a margin bottom on each of these. And this looks roughly around 20 pixels, give or take. So instead of trying to set that on each of these, let's create a class selector that grabs all of them. And what we could do is we could come down here and grab each of them one at a time, separated by commas, but that's going to get very tedious. The better way to do it is to come to the HTML, and instead of trying to grab them all by IDs, let's assign a class to each of the grid items. So we'll just say grid item is going to be the class name, and then we can copy that down into each of these divs. And here's a little shortcut within Visual Studio Code. If you find the spot that you want to go in and you hold down the Alt key, it's different on Mac, but on Windows it'd be the Alt key, and then you click in a different place, you'll see there's 2 cursors. So we'll click again, and now there's 3 cursors, and then finally 4. And what you can do is now we can type all at once and paste in those class those classes that we just created. So there we go. We've got class of grid item in each of these grid items, and now we can come down and just select that and set a margin bottom of 20 pixels. So when we click save, we've got a nice amount of spacing between the items. Furthermore, another similar thing between all of the grid items, if we look at our styles here, is that the padding around the content is the same on each of them. And it looks like, I'm not exactly sure, but it might be somewhere around 20 pixels as well. So we'll start with that and we can tweak it as we go. So we'll set padding of 20 pixels, click save, and now our boxes are looking a whole lot better than they did a few minutes ago. So we are far from done here with the mobile design, but right around this point, once I'm like happy with the general layout, obviously the text isn't right in here, we're missing pieces, but once I'm satisfied and it doesn't look like completely terrible, then that's when I go to the desktop design and start making it responsive, because I want to get the layout correct before I start, adding a bunch of other things in. So what we will do here is we're going to shrink this Visual Studio Code window a little bit, close the editor so we have some more space, and then make this browser window larger so that we can use the Chrome DevTools. And when we bring this down here, I'm going to click this button right here so we can toggle the device toolbar. And now we have the ability to see this at different sizes really quickly without resizing the entire screen. So that'll be helpful as we can actually see the width up here updating live. So that'll be really helpful as we resize on different devices and design for that. So here's about our mobile design. If you just click this bar, you can get a small mobile device. You can click here for medium and here for a large mobile device. So here's the large mobile device, and the reason it shrunk is because we're at 40%. So let's go to maybe 75%. You can see it a little bit better. And then as we resize this, we're getting into the larger desktop devices. I know I had mentioned about 576 pixels for the breakpoint we're going to use. And again, that is because earlier in this course when we talked about responsive design, I just said, let's go ahead and use the Bootstrap CSS framework breakpoints. They're right here, so they go from 576, 768, 992. In our case, we've got two designs only, so we're only going to need a single breakpoint for this. Now we just have to decide at what point do we break. So if you just play around with this design and you just look at the text, right around, so we're at 708 pixels wide right now, and this is getting a little bit wide for my liking with this mobile design over here. So I think 576, right about here, is going to be just about the widest we'll go for that mobile design, and that's going to be our breakpoint then. To set that breakpoint, we come over to our CSS, we write @media for a media query, and since we're doing mobile first design, we'll set a min width of 576 pixels. So now we open the brackets up, and any styles we put here are going to apply to anything bigger than 576, so all of this right here. And before we get too far, let's go ahead and test it. This is really important as you're coding, whether it's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or anything else. Do it incrementally. Don't just write a bunch of code and then test it out all at the end. So let's test it out by targeting a p tag and giving it a color of red, something obnoxious, and we'll click save. Right now we're at 444 pixels, so we would not expect this style to apply, but as we go above 576, we would expect all the text to turn red. So let's see if it does, and it does. So that means that our media query is working great. Remember, always put these media queries at the bottom of your CSS, otherwise they may get overwritten by other styles. So our goal here, before we get any further, is once we hit above 576, so when this is turning red, and the reason it's doing that is because I haven't saved yet, But once we get above here, we would expect this layout to look like this desktop design over here. So the question is, how do we do that? And the way that we're going to solve this is with Flexbox. I'm just going to expand this VS Code so that we can really look at the design here. So as I look at this, just by experience alone, I'm thinking to myself that using Flexbox, we're probably going to need to split these into subcontainers. Now there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. As always, there's more than one way to solve the problem, but I'm going to choose the most straightforward and beginner-friendly way of doing this. I'm thinking that there is probably a way that we could take all 4 of these items on the left side, wrap those in a container, and then control the overflow of the container with flex wrap, and then size them accordingly. But I'm thinking that might get a little bit complex to try to implement, and by adding just one extra container, we can avoid all of that. So what I'm thinking is that we split the overall layout into 2 containers. So the first container is going to be all 4 of these items right here, and the second container will be this item on the right. By doing this, we can take container 1 on the left and container 2 on the right, and we can display flex, and they will go side by side next to each other. But that doesn't solve how we lay out these items on the left. So what I would want to do within those containers, so remember we have one container on the left, one on the right, and then the left container we can further divide into 2 other containers. So we'll have a top and a bottom container, and in each of those we will display flex so that they sit next to each other, and then we can use flex basis to make the dimensions of each of these a little bit different. I know this is a little abstract, so let me just show you exactly what I mean. So we'll keep that down here, and this all happens within the HTML itself. So to take these 4 items on the left and wrap them in a container, we just need to find them. So here are the first 4, and all we have to do is go at the top of here and set a container. Now we have to decide what to name it so that we can target it with CSS. Naming things is always difficult. I'm not going to overcomplicate it here. We're just going to call it main left and make that div. And then within main left, like I said, we're going to have a top part and a bottom part. There's a couple ways I could do this, but once again, I'll go very simple. And I'll just say top, and then we'll name the other one bottom. So at this point, I've got everything laid out correctly. So we want to grab items 1 and 2, so this one, and put it in that top container right here. So we'll do that. We will just cut these away here and put them there. And then in the bottom, we will take items 3 and 4 and put them there. Now finally, we have testimonial 5, and I said we're going to make a separate container for that. But lucky enough, we've already wrapped our entire grid within the testimonial grid container. And if you think about this from a Flexbox perspective, we always have to think container and direct children. Doesn't matter the grandchildren or great-grandchildren, those don't apply in Flexbox. So all we have to know is what is the parent and what direct children does that parent have. This testimonial grid container has exactly 2 direct children. It has the main left, and then it has the testimonial 5, which is that, this tall card here on the right. So now that we've got this laid out, let's save it. And I will now bring this back to the left side of the screen so that we can look at it again. And you'll see that on the mobile device, nothing has changed here. We put all these containers, but since we haven't selected them with CSS, there's really no change to the overall layout quite yet. But now this is where the real magic is going to happen. And what we could do is, since we're now designing for the desktop, we did mobile first with all of these styles. Now we're doing desktop within the media query. But again, remember, you don't have to put everything within that media query. There can be some shared CSS properties between mobile and desktop designs. So the first style I'll add is going to be the testimonial grid container. We want to do work from the outside in. So we'll go to style.css and we'll put that into our media query. And the only thing we need to do here for the moment is write display flex. And when we click save, you'll see nothing happens here because we're still looking at the mobile device. But as we make this larger, now you see that this the main left container with all 4 of those items go left, and then the last item, testimonial 5, will be pushed off to the right because we've displayed them on the main axis, which is horizontal. Now if you look at this design, obviously this testimonial 5 has much less width than the rest. So we can set that with flex, and I suppose it's probably about 25%. It looks like 20 to 25% of the total width. So let's come to our style.css, and on each item we can set the flex basis. So in this case we're going to want to grab testimonial 5 and target that with our ID selector, and then we'll say the flex basis for that, we'll start with 20% and see what that looks like. Okay, that's a little bit small. I'm thinking that we'll need maybe 25%. I like that a little bit better, and we can always tweak it as we go. The next thing we have to do is look at these 4 items on the left, and they obviously, the top 2 go next to each other and the bottom 2 go next to each other as well. Therefore, we need to make the top a flex container and the bottom a flex container. So you'll see the ID is top and bottom. So all we need to do is come over here and say top display flex, and then bottom display flex. But we have a little bit of a problem here because they're not taking up the whole height of that main container. So if we go to the index.html, we have the main left container, and we want this right testimonial 5 to be equal in height to these other testimonials. To do this, we need to also turn the main left container into a flex container. So we'll go right here and display flex, and this is not going to look right for a second because when we do that, it puts everything in a row. But if we change the flex direction of the main left to be column, now it's going to go back and look the same, but now we have control using Flexbox of how those are distributed. So if we look at this main left container, which its direct children are going to be the top and the bottom, which are also flex containers, we can distribute those using the justify content. Since we set the flex direction to column, the main axis is going to be going vertical, and therefore justify content allows us to align on the main axis. We also have the ability to say how large we want these using flex basis. So while top and bottom are flex containers in relation to their children HTML elements, they are flex items in relation to the main left container. So if we come down and set the flex basis to, we'll start with 50% on each of them, and then I'll show you why that's not going to work perfectly. So we'll save that, and now you see that we have these filling up the total height of that main left container. And I was actually wrong. The flex basis of 50% works just fine because in the mobile version we set the padding, or we set the margin bottom of 20 pixels, so there's already some space between. We'll obviously have to space out horizontally, but we'll do that in just a bit. Now the next question we have to ask is, how do we get these proportions correct with these 4 containers? To do that, we can work directly with the top and bottom, and we can use the flex basis of their children items to do that. So all we have to do is grab, let's see exactly how we need to do this. It looks like these are a complete mirror of each other, so this first one and the fourth one are about equal proportion, and the second and third one are equal proportion. So we know that our percentages are going to work pretty much the same. So to do this, we're going to need to grab testimonial 1 through 4 and put them down in our media query, which is our desktop design. So if we put these at the bottom, remember in our desktop design, these are considered flex items. We can go ahead and get rid of these two properties because they're already defined in our mobile version, which also applies to the desktop as long as we don't override them. So we can get rid of all those. But now we can set a flex basis. So the first one, this purple one, looks like it's got about 75% of the width. So we'll go with 75%. And then that means testimonial 2 is going to have a flex basis of 25% because we want to fill up the whole width of that container. And testimonial 3 is going to have a flex basis of also 25% and then a flex basis of 75% for that last one. So when we click save, you should see the proportions update pretty nicely here. As we compare this design right here to our desktop design picture, you'll probably notice that it looks a little bit wider overall, and you'll see that there's more room around the entire container. So let's just fix that so that we are not thrown off by these proportions. And the way that we'll do that, I believe we can just add a max width to the entire container. So let's look at our index.html. And our testimonial grid container is probably what we're going to want to select. And we've already got that selected in the media query. So on a larger device, maybe we set the max width of, let's say, looks like this might be like 600 pixels. That's just a rough guess. So that's a little bit narrow. So maybe we'll set the max width to say 700 maybe. That looks a little bit better. Let's go up to 750. I think that's kind of in the ballpark. And then to center this, we could use like Flexbox, but honestly, the easier way is this little trick where you set a margin of 0 pixels top and bottom, and then left and right, you give it auto. So it's gonna automatically give the margin to center it. So when we click save, you'll see it all goes to the middle. And now we're starting to see a little bit more proportioned grid here. Now, at this point, I think this is a little bit small, the proportion we've given to that right one. So let's change the flex basis of testimonial 5 to be maybe something like 35%. And then, of course, we need to set the left one to be the same. So we need to set the flex basis on the main left, which is all 4 of these items together. We'll set this to about 70%, I think, and then update this testimonial 5 to be 30%. And I think that looks just a little bit better for us. Once we add some spacing here, it should look a lot better. So to finish this off here, the layout, it looks like there's some spacing between each of these items, horizontally. And there's a few ways that we could do this. Actually, I'm now thinking we might even go like 35, 65 here. And now we have these ones which are squished a little bit. So maybe we need to update this container, give it a bigger max width. Then we'll change the 75, 25. At this point, I'm just like adjusting things until we get generally the right fit. So let's try maybe like a 70, 30. That looks slightly better, but I still think we can go a little bit more. So 65, 35. There we go. I think this looks relatively good. And then now that we've adjusted this looks a little bit too big. So we'll claw this one back to 70 and 30. And I think we're looking good here. I think the proportions between this and our design is relatively good. And then of course this bottom one, we need to match the top. So we'll just come down and do that real quick. So 65, 35. So this one needs to be updated to 35. and 65, and now our grid is looking really good. Now to get the spacing horizontally, you'll see that there's these little gutters here. So right now we don't have any spacing horizontally. We could do this with margin, as we kind of did vertically with that margin, but I'm going to try to apply our Flexbox skills to make this happen, which is a totally valid way to do it as well. So the first one we have to take care of is the main left container, which surrounds all 4 of these, and then testimonial 5 here on the right. Right now we have a flex basis of 30% on this far right and 70% on the main left container, so it's split in 2. But if we reduced those by a couple percentages and then we aligned them with space between them, we could add that little vertical gutter in there. So what I'll do is I'll take the main left container and just bring it down to, say, 68%. So now we have about 2% empty space within the container. So let's save that, and you'll see there's no space because it's kind of added at the end. It's kind of invisible here on the right. But if we come up to the testimonial grid container, and what we do is we justify content, because remember, the main left with all 4 of those items and the testimonial 5 on the right are aligned on a main axis which goes horizontal because the flex direction is set to row by default. So justify content allows us to align those within there. And all we have to say is space between. And when we do that, you'll see that there's a little space added there because we added some extra empty space and then we spaced them out between. We can do the same exact thing with these flex items here too. So the top flex container, the flex basis is 50%, or actually I'm not doing this right. So the top and bottom are going to be the flex containers. So let's just set the justify content on here to be space between to start off. All right, and we'll save that, and we won't see any changes because currently the flex basis equals 100%, so there's no space to add between. But if we reduce, we'll just reduce testimonial 1 to 63%, so we have 2% left over once again, and we'll save it, and now we have that little space of 2% added in there as well. Now, of course, 2% on a large container versus 2% on a much smaller container is going to equal a different pixel width. So as you see in the design, the little gutter here between this testimonial 5 on the right and all 4 of these on the left, that vertical gutter is a little bit wider than the vertical gutters that we just added to these containers right here. So you see how to do it with Flexbox. If you're okay with that fact, then you can just leave it as we have it. But what I'm going to do, just for demonstration purposes, is I'm going to undo everything that we just did. So we'll set everything back to their original percentages. We'll remove the justify contents and save it. And now we're back to this place where we have no space between. And a really simple way that we could do this is we could just look at all of the flex items or all of the grid items here on the left. We can just add a margin to the right of, say, 20 pixels, and it will be equal across the board. So if we look at our index.html, we have all of these individual items with a class of grid item, but we don't want to add the margin right to this last testimonial. So one way that we could do that is we could look at the main left container, which has these 4 items, and then we can select all descendants with a class of grid item, so it only selects those 4. So I'll show you what I mean here. I guess we'll put this up here right under main left, and we'll say main left is the parent that we want to look at, and then we want to grab all grid item descendants of that. And now what we can do, let me just show you what we're selecting first. So we'll set a color of red so that the text turns red, and we'll click save. And now you can see all of these left four grid items have red text, but we've excluded the right one with this CSS selector. That's exactly what we want. So we'll add a margin to the right of 20 pixels, and you're going to see that this just gets spaced out really nicely automatically. And that is, it's a little much. Maybe let's go with 15 pixels. And that is exactly how we would add that spacing on the right naturally. And now it's equal between all of them. At this point, the overall structure of our grid looks very good. And now that I'm looking at it one more time, it seems that this right one is still a little bit too wide. And I apologize for going back and forth here, trying to teach and see how to do this at the same time, so it's a little bit tough. So let's bring this back to 25% on testimonial 5 and 75 on the main left container. I think this looks good, and I really hope I don't change my mind on that again. I might, but as of right now, this looks very similar. And the cool thing is, if we resize this down to mobile, so once we hit 576 pixels, it should break and boom, we have our mobile design. So we don't have to update anything on the mobile side of things. We just made this desktop design and it's pretty much responsive. Now the one thing you'll notice is as we shrink it, these get shrunk a little bit. So it may not look perfect, say on like a tablet, but it should work okay. You could always add an additional breakpoint if you wanted to adjust those flex basis numbers so that it looks better on tablet, but I'm not going to worry about that here because I think it would just be distracting from the main lessons. All right, so we have got our layout done. It is responsive, and now we should be able to just go in and look at this entire design here and start adding in all of these components and styling them out. Before we do that though, I'd like to clean up our CSS a little bit because at the moment we are duplicating a lot of our CSS rules. So this is what we would call kind of refactoring. So you write the code out, you don't really worry about doing it perfectly the first time, but then you kind of edit and you iterate on it and make it a little bit cleaner. So what you'll see is we've written this rule of display flex several different times. So what we can do is we can take all of these IDs where we're writing that display flex and put it into one single CSS rule. Some might say this is not worth doing, but I think it is. It's nice to break out our code a little bit. So we want to select our testimonial grid container and display flex. Let me just write the rule first. And then of course we want to select more than just the testimonial grid. So what else uses flex? We have the main left, so we'll copy that in there. So main left, top and bottom. So those are all going to display flex, and now we can get rid of all of those individual rules on each of them. Click Save, it should look the same. Down here we have these four flex items, all set with flex basis percentages that are very similar. So let's group this together. Let's take testimonial 3, combine it with that rule, and delete all of this. And we'll take testimonial 4, combine it with that rule, and delete this last one. Save it, should get the same thing. Top and bottom now both have a flex basis of 50%, and that's the only rule. So we don't need them broken out separately. We can just bring those together and delete that rule. Click Save, should be the same. And then I'm going to take all of our flex rules and just kind of group them together here. So let me just put those here. Okay, so now we have all of our CSS grouped up a little bit better, and we can start working on adding the content. I'm going to shrink this screen, and we'll go ahead and close the dev tools. And we'll just work on this first on the mobile design so that we have some more screen real estate, and then we'll check it on desktop to make sure everything is working. So we'll open up our File Explorer and index.html along with our placeholder text, because this is what we're going to actually be putting in to all of these containers. And I'm just going to look at the desktop design. I know we're doing mobile over here, but it's just bigger so we can see it better. I'll go through the first one with you, and then the rest of them are going to be pretty much exactly the same, so I'll let you do those on your own and I'll just speed through it. So with this first card right here, now we have this big quotation. We're going to worry about that totally last. We're not going to worry about that yet. The content itself, it looks like we have a picture, we have a name, we have, this says verified graduate, so they're the status of that person, and then we have the main testimonial and the secondary testimonial. So just looking at this immediately, we need an image tag. We need a paragraph tag, another paragraph tag, looks like maybe an H4 tag, and then another paragraph tag. So let's get the picture first. This first one is Daniel Clifford. So we're going to need that image, and that's been provided to us. If we go to the images folder, you should see image daniel.jpg. So we can finally start to replace this. So we're on testimonial 1 right here. And we're first going to put in an image. So we'll use the Emmet abbreviation, click tab. And the source that we want is going to be the relative path. And then we'll say images. And then we want image-Daniel. And then the alt attribute, this is for accessibility. You should always put this in here. So Daniel profile picture, just a description of what that is. Click save. You'll see this image come in to our first grid item. We now need to write in his name and verified graduate. So let's do that. We'll just use a p tag. So Daniel Clifford, verified graduate. There we go. We've got those added in there. Now we have to go find the text. So it says, I received a job offer mid-course. Okay, so there's our Daniel. So here's our first piece of text. We'll put that in the p tag right here. So there's that text, and then finally we'll just want one more p tag. And actually, no, this will not be a p tag. Let's just set that as an h4. I think that's roughly what we would want here. That looks okay. We can always switch it later. And then finally, we have this last piece of text. So this is the longer testimonial that we'll put in the p tag right here. All sorts of formatting issues, so I'm just going to get this all on one line here. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to just do this anyway. Okay, so we've got our first card done, and like I said, you can go through and figure out how to do the rest of them. It's the same exact pattern for each of the different testimonial cards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this entire structure, and I'm going to come down and replace each item with it. When we click save, you'll see that it's all looking the same, and then now we can just switch the individual parts. So the second testimonial, if we open up the desktop design, it's going to be Jonathan. So based on the image names here, we have image Jonathan. So we really can just come into find the second one here, so testimonial 2, replace the link here, click save. Now we have Jonathan in here, and then you just update the rest of the text. So I'm going to speed through this, and I'll see you when I'm done. All right, we are done, and you can see that I've got all of the text and images in here. Now it's just a matter of styling these. If you look at the main design, they're all about the same. So we have the image in a circle on the left with the name and the verified graduate right under it, and then the actual testimonial below. So it makes no sense to try to target each of these individually. We'll just set a common class among all of them and then style it one time. Let's start with the image and the name to the right of the image. The first thing that we need to do, because how I see this is we've got the image on the left and then the name and verified graduate stacked on top of each other. So to get those next to each other, a great way to do it is Flexbox. So the image will be flex item number 1, and then we'll make a container around the name and the verified graduate, which will be flex item number 2. To do that, we just come to the HTML. We'll go to the first one here, and we'll come right above the image, and what should we name this? We'll just call it a class of header. And then within header, we're going to have the image and then another container with the other text. So I'm going to call that container header text. Okay, so now all we have to do is drop in the image up top and then these two p tags in this container down here. I'm going to split our style.css to the right here in Visual Studio Code so we can see both. And as we look at the header and the header text, we can come down, since this applies to both mobile and desktop, we'll just write it up in the mobile first section where it applies to pretty much everything. And we'll just put it at the bottom. We want to target header, which is going to be display flex. Automatically, when we click save, you're going to see it jumps on to the correct line. And then these are lined up. So if you look at this, the picture and the text, they're like on the same horizontal axis. So the way that we get that to happen is align items. So we're aligning items on the cross axis to be center. So now that's going to work. And then of course we need to grab the image. So from the header container, we want to grab all images. And we want the border radius to be, it's just a trick to make circular pictures. We want that to be 50%. So you see now we have a circle picture. And then we want the margin right to be, let's call it 5 pixels. Actually, that's not enough, so let's do 10 pixels. Now you can see there's a little space between those. Lastly, we need some space under this header container. So we'll come back up to header, set a margin bottom of maybe 20 pixels, and that will space us out from this top header container to the text under it. Now, of course, this has not applied to the rest of the testimonials, but we will follow the same exact process. As long as we keep the same class on them, these CSS styles should apply just fine. So I'm going to speed through this so you don't have to watch me do it completely. I'm just going to go and create this exact structure below for each of them. And probably should have done this the first time around, but whatever, we'll get through it. Okay, so I got that done, and that's kind of a good lesson there. You usually want to finish like one iteration, so one card, get it all correct, and then apply the styles to the rest. I didn't do that, so had to pay for it with some extra time. The next thing I'm going to do is space out these two pieces of text. So the first one's an H4, the second one is a paragraph tag. So we can select that with our styles pretty easily. All we have to do is look at any grid item class and select the H4s and add a margin bottom. So we'll say grid item H4, and we'll set a margin bottom of 20 pixels maybe. I think that looks okay. So 20 pixels, yeah, that looks pretty good. We're getting close to the finish line here. The next thing you'll notice is there's rounded corners on each of these cards. That'll be pretty easy to apply. So let's go find our grid item style, which selects all the grid items, and we'll set a border radius of around 5 pixels maybe. That'll make those rounded corners, so that looks good. There's also a little bit of a drop shadow on each of these, or at least the white ones, but we'll just go ahead and put it on each of them just for simplicity. So any grid item is going to get a box shadow You can go to a box shadow tool online. This is just the standard that I always put in there. Is a black color with 20% opacity, and then I kind of tweak these values right here until I get roughly what I want. So you can see there's a little box shadow there. I might spread this out a little bit more. It's not exactly what we're looking for, but it's pretty close, and I'm not too concerned about getting this verbatim to the design. The next big piece to this is the font. So in the style guide, if we go here to the style guide, it's going to tell you what font you need to use. So for typography, the body copy is 13 pixels. We haven't set that yet. Actually, let's do that really quick. So for grid items, you could set this at multiple levels, but for grid items, we'll set the font size to be 13 pixels. Makes it a lot smaller here for us. And then for grid item H4s, we'll set the font size back up. So we'll say maybe 1.2 rem. So that's the root element is going to be the HTML, which I believe is set default to 16 pixels. So that will make it a much bigger text. And I think that looks relatively good. Decent proportions there, so I'm okay with that. And now we have to actually change the font itself. So in the style guide, it says that we need the Barlow semi-condensed font from Google Fonts. I happen to have this open already. Let me expand the screen. And all you have to do is select the styles that you want. So we will do that, and it looks like we need 500 and 600 font weights. So we will go grab medium, which is 500, and 600, which is semi-bold. Now it's saying that we just need to put this link in our HTML document, so we'll copy that. Should be good on this, so let me resize the screen real quick. And now all we need to do with this is put it into our HTML. So we put this in the head, and we can put it right by our style sheet link. So I think usually you're supposed to put this after your style sheet so that this applies. I'm not entirely certain if that matters a ton. Let's save it. By default, it's not going to be using it because we haven't enabled it. So we'll have to come back to our styles.css, and in the body, this might be where we put the font family, and this is where we'll go to the rules here, and we can just paste in this CSS rule actually. So we'll be using Barlow semi-condensed with a fallback of sans serif. Save that, and you can see all of the font is looking a lot closer to our demo here. You'll notice that these white cards have a gray text rather than the black text we're giving it, so let's update that. I believe we have a rule for this already. So we can actually condense testimonial 5 and 3 into one because they have the same styles. And then the font color that we need, if we go to the style guide, is probably this light gray, I'm thinking. Nope, that's a little too light. So we'll try the dark grayish blue. And I think that's a little bit closer. May not be exact, but I'm thinking it's close enough. It's better than the black that we had before. Now the smaller text has a little bit less opacity than the main text, and then we also need to set the font weight. So let's look at the style guide. It says for the typography, or note for the text colors, the verified graduate, okay, we're not ready for that yet. Review paragraphs inside quotes have the same color but are 70% opacity. So in our design here, we have a couple different p tags. So we have the name, verified graduate, and then the testimonial down here. So if we just set the font weight of a p tag and the opacity of a p tag for all of them, that will apply to mostly what we want, because we want this testimonial to have 70% opacity and probably verified graduate as well. And then we can specifically override that opacity style to be 100% for the name later. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll see if we have something for this already. So we have grid item. So we'll just set the grid item p tags. So any p tag within the grid item, we want to set the opacity to 70%. And then for the name, let's just add a class so we can use the Alt key to come into all of the p tags with the name. Just holding down Alt. And we can give it a class name. And then we can come down into the name selector and give it an opacity of 100%. Maybe not the most effective solution, but it works. And we probably need to select it with header to be more specific than our grid item P, because header and name, that's two class selectors, is more specific than grid item P, which is a class and a tag selector. So this one takes precedence and we'll override it. Now I think we just need to tweak a few things with the text here, not a whole lot. We might want to make the name just slightly larger than that default 13 pixels. So we can come to that rule that we just created. So the name, and we'll say the font size is going to be 1.1 rem. Actually, that's going to be way too large. How about 1 rem, so 16 pixels. That looks better. If you open this up, you might see a little border around these pictures too. So while we're here, we can look at the header image, and we can give it a border of 1 pixel, solid, maybe purple. I think some of them are different, but let's just go with purple on all of them. You can see that little border that we have around there. You can tweak that how you like it. Lastly, I think the font weights look okay, but they did tell us to import weights of 500 and 600, so we should probably explicitly set those. So on the grid item H4s, we'll give a font weight of 600. Looks about the same, so not a huge change. For the most part, I think I'm happy with the design we have. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's pretty close. And more importantly, we've gone through a lot of the concepts that we've covered in the previous videos, which is always fun to apply those. Leave a comment if I missed anything. I think the only thing remaining is this big quote up here. And there's a couple ways you could approach this. I do not believe there's any assets for this. Like, this is not an image. Actually, it is. So this is an SVG. And we could use this SVG. I don't want to get too far into CSS and SVGs. It's like a whole other topic, but I'll go ahead and just quickly put it in and show you how to do it. So what we can do is this background pattern quotation SVG. If we click on it, it's just a bunch of numbers, but we can actually put this into an image, I believe. So if we come to our index.html, let me get this CSS collapsed a little bit. And it's obviously on the main card, the purple card here, so number 1. We can pretty much put it wherever we would like here within this main card. So let's make an image, and then the source is going to be images and then background pattern quotation. So now you see that quote is already in there. That's nice. Now we just need to absolutely position this because it's in that weird spot. So it's like kind of randomly up there in the top right corner. Let's give it an ID. So we'll give it the quote ID, and then we come over to our CSS and we will select quote, and we'll say position absolute. And what that is going to do is position it relative to, I believe, the viewport by default. Let's see how that works. So from the right, we want it to be 20 pixels roughly. Okay, yeah, so it's relative to the viewport. We want it relative to this container itself. So to do that, we need to set the testimonial1 container to be position relative. And once we do that, that quote will come in correctly. Come down to quote, it should be probably more like 30 pixels from the right, and then from the top, it is pretty much flush with the top, so we'll do 0. And you can see that gets us a little bit closer. And as we resize this, it's obviously going to change that a little bit. So maybe from the right, we go like 3%. I'm just going to experiment around with this until we get it right. Maybe like 7%. That's closer. Let's just ramp it up to 15. Okay. I like that. I think 15 is pretty good. And like I said, it's flush with the top, so that's good. And then finally, as we resize this, I know this doesn't look amazing. We're just kind of in that middle state where it's like, this is like bigger than a mobile device, but smaller than a tablet. So you're really not going to see this on any device for the most part. So like here is about where you're going to start seeing it. And it looks like the quote is like a little bit above that text. And in our actual design here, it's showing it as behind the text, like overlapping. That's partially because of the spacing that we've given it, so I'm not overly concerned about it. But as we resize it and it does kind of overlap text, we want that to go behind everything. So to do that, we need to go to the styles. We need to set the z-index equal to like -1. Or actually, let's set this z-index to 1, and then on the testimonial 1, we will set the z-index to be 0. So it's above the testimonial card, but then we want it to be below the testimonial text. So we'll set the z-index of the header to 3. I think that might get us there, maybe not. There we go. We just need to set it to position relative so that the z-index applies. And now it should be going behind any text and stuff like that. So should be good there. And I think our design is pretty much complete. So as you can see, like we could spend the next hour or 2 hours trying to get this to look exactly like the example here. Just if you're curious, I took a second to try to figure this out fully, exactly how we can get it to look like this, and didn't come all the way there, but I did get it somewhat close. So I put a max width of 1440 according to the style guide here where it says the desktop is 1440. And then I set the testimonial 5 and main left containers to 80 and 20% respectively. So this looks okay. I think it's not exact, like I said, but it's a little bit closer. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, but as we resize this, it should be responsive. We have this like middle state where it's a little bit weird, but honestly, trying to perfect that is just going to be a lot of tedious tweaks that you can kind of do on your own if you want. But the main goal here has been accomplished. On desktop, it looks like this, and on mobile, it looks like this, where we have everything stacked on top of each other. So now at this point, we're going to take this local host that nobody can see, and we're going to deploy this to GitHub Pages so that you can pass it off as a link and show off your project. So the way that we'll do that, let's close out everything here so we have a clean workspace. So what we can do is we can open up source control. This is embedded within Visual Studio Code. And what we can do is initialize a repository. And this can be done on the command line too, but I think we should, since we haven't learned Git yet, and I don't expect you to understand any of this quite yet, might as well use the visual interface. So from here, we initialize the repository, and it says Control Enter to commit on master. So we can write a message, just say first commit and then control enter. We're going to stage all our changes and commit them directly. Yes. And I'm actually set up with GitHub already, so it may ask you to go through some authorization where you have to sign in to GitHub, so go ahead and do that if you have to. Now what we have to do is create a new repository so on our GitHub. So if you don't have an account, sign up for GitHub. You'll need it for the rest of your developer life. Click new repository, and we'll just say testimonial grid front-end mentor challenge solution. Very long repository name. You don't need to make it that long. And we'll just create the repository, make it public. Not too worried about initializing all of this stuff. Now from here, you're just going to copy the HTTPS link, come back to Visual Studio Code, click these three dots, click remote, add remote, and then we're going to put in that URL. From there, we should be good. I think we want to push it to the main branch, so let me see what we're working with here. Yep, so we need to push to main, but this is just the name we're giving it, so origin. We're just linking up our code here to the GitHub repository. And again, you don't need to understand this. We're just trying to get it deployed here. So now we're going to click push. Okay. Then let's check it out here. We'll refresh. And you'll see that we have all of these files that we just created from Visual Studio Code here on our repository. Right now, we don't have it deployed to GitHub Pages. The way that we can do that, we can do it here, or we can do it within Visual Studio Code, but quite honestly, doing it within the repository is relatively straightforward since we already have index.html in the main root of the directory. So we'll go to master, find or create a branch, and type GitHub Pages. And it says create branch GitHub Pages from master, which is exactly what we want to do. This is master, what we're looking at right now. So we'll create that branch. And now let's go back to our main repository. And I believe it should publish this to GitHub Pages in the next minute or two. It doesn't happen like instantaneously because what it's actually doing is taking our code files and putting them on GitHub Pages, which is just another server, and then serving them over our GitHub URL. Let's refresh the page. Looks like our environments has been set up now, so we can click on the main repository, we can click GitHub Pages, and then view the deployment. And you can see that what we just created is now live. And this link up here, you can copy and share with someone else. And as we resize it, it of course is going to resize to that mobily responsive width, and then desktop responsive.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the CSS Flexbox course. I hope you learned a lot here. Be sure to check out the video description for a link that will give you some additional resources and maybe next steps. If you liked this, if it helped you out, be sure to give the video a like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out. And until next time, I'll see you later.